Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of Dark Souls 3. Now I believe with every single video on my channel, I like to start off with a little bit of prefaced information to kind of explain to people where I come from whenever I'm reviewing a game or just on any real subject, to help you, the viewer, form your own opinions based on what I have to say. However, if you don't want to hear about me or any of the information I have to say that will explain my arguments, you can just skip straight to the actual arguments I'm making, the actual content of the video right now with this annotation. I highly recommend, however, that you don't skip all this prefaced information because it can be a little important. First off, my background in the Souls series. I'm a late entry to the Dark Souls fanbase. I believe I started in 2013, which was just 1 year before Dark Souls 2 was released. I have beaten both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 multiple times. I have played Demon Souls and Bloodborne, though I never beat them. Mostly because I can't watch a TV for more than a few hours without my eyes hurting. Please take this into consideration, especially when I'm talking about combat, because I know that Bloodborne's combat probably heavily influenced this game. I'm recording all this preface information before the game is actually finished downloading. As far as my experience with Dark Souls 1 and 2, not only have I beaten them, I've beaten them multiple times, and I've spent over 400 hours in Dark Souls 2 alone. I was a part of the Souls Twitch community for a long time before my inclusion in that little nonsense died, and I share the general consensus opinion that Dark Souls 2 was not as good as Dark Souls 1. However, I do believe that Dark Souls 2 PvP was better. I'm also one of the people who was incredibly disappointed and jaded by the fact that Namco provided pre-release footage that looked way better than the actual game as far as Dark Souls 2 is concerned. Also, one last personal thing about me when it comes to Dark Souls, I'm a person who thinks that Dark Souls should have never had a sequel, and if it did, it should have had sequels that had their own stories in completely different universes or worlds or countries or whatever, that have nothing to do with each other and are just good ways to get a good message across like Dark Souls 1 was. It should be noted, however, I still really love Dark Souls. Dark Souls 1 is my second favorite game of all time, and Dark Souls 2 just disappointed me a lot because it wasn't as good as the first one. This is important to know because as a fan of this series, I'm going to be incredibly critical of it. A lot of people seem to think that fans of a series are going to look at it with tinted glasses, but I believe the opposite is the case. But I think 2 minutes is enough about me. Let me just get into the generic spoiler warnings for this video because we will be going through the entirety of Dark Souls 3, including all of the plot points. We will be doing so chronologically, so if you want to, you can watch some of this video up until the point where we start talking about what you know, and you can stop and go play the game. However, to get the full effect of the video, I will recommend that you actually go and play the game. This is more of a critique than a review, I suppose, but if you're just wondering if you should buy the game or not and are willing to get spoiled a little bit, I guess that you can watch it. If you don't want to get spoiled but you still want to know whether or not you should buy the game, I usually have a conclusive argument towards the end of the video, or series of videos depending on how long this takes, because unfortunately my computer cannot handle more than 1 hour of footage being rendered at a time, in which I will probably be generalizing all the arguments I've made without as many spoilers as the entire video will have together. But as far as right now is concerned, let's play Dark Souls 3. Now, all of the reviews I've made on this channel have been done in chronological order, anything from Fallout 4 to Undertale to Black Desert Online, and Dark Souls 3 will be no exception. We will be starting off this critique with the very first thing we see, the title screen. Just kidding, I'm not that pedantic. I am, however, pedantic enough to start criticizing the game with the opening cinematic. Now, of course, visually, the opening cinematic itself is an incredibly impressive piece of visual art. It probably takes thousands of man and computer hours to generate something like this and to actually animate it and have it move properly, and it shows, and it is very much worth it. It looks awesome. However, there are details about it I did and did not like. The first detail I did like about it is that it generally seems to be following the same archetype that the first one did. The first one being Dark Souls 1 opening cinematic, in which all of the major lore characters are explained to us, and all the major lore events, all the backstory, is also explained to us. Meaning that right off the bat we know who these people were and what they do. Or at least we know who these people are because Dark Souls 3's opening cinematic doesn't really explain much about what anyone has done so far. Other than that, we know that these 3 Cinder guys have left their throne. And yes, I did say Cinder, like Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder, because this game seems to be much more like a sequel to Dark Souls than Dark Souls 2 was, which I don't like. Again, personally, I would prefer if Dark Souls games took place in entirely different continents with entirely different lore each game. Reusing lore is fine, but I honestly just think that it's only done because they want to have an attachment to the previous games, to give the players something to attach onto, to maybe make them think that the game is a little better than it really is. When I first heard about the Lords of Cinder, I really wasn't impressed, nor was I amused. To quote Matthew Matosis, which is a statement that I can agree upon. Seeing Dark Souls 3 begin to retread the same stuff that we've already done 2 games now seems incredibly uncreative. I don't think we need to have the Lords of Cinder, and I don't think we need to have the Age of Fire, and I don't think this needs to be in Lordran with a different name. I would have preferred if this took place in a different kingdom, in a different land, with all these same characters who just serve a different purpose other than being the new Lords of Cinder. However, everything else about the cinematic I am personally okay with. The only thing I dislike about it is the fact that we seem to be saying, once again, that Dark Souls 1 ends with the fire ending instead of of the Dark Wraith ending, because I think Dark Souls 1 should have just ended mysteriously without any right or wrong answer. This game sets up a pretty interesting scenario where apparently the new Lords of Cinder have abandoned their throne instead of actually just leaving it, and that now we're aware that the Age of Fire will come to an end and it's now being coveted and protected with some kind of bell. But not only that, because the throne seems to be being abandoned by these Lords of Cinders, or at least that's what the cinematic says, someone seems to be usurping it by taking a crown off a pedestal. I also like how now we seem to be starting off as just some random undead unfit to be Cinder instead of supposedly some kind of ancient ancestor to the furtive pygmy. Considering that the nature of Dark Souls' gameplay, lore, and world are incredibly bleak and unforgiving, I don't think the player being some kind of special star child of some ancient thing is a good idea. I personally like the idea that I'm just some mook who's sent on a quest. However, I do like the fact that the Dark Souls 3 cinematic has a lot more going for it than the Dark Souls 2 cinematic. The Dark Souls 2 cinematic just seems to be some random cutscene about a family that has nothing to do with the player character and a rambling about how we're going to die a lot, and about how Drang Lake is a little bit muddy. This one actually has a story going for it. However, I believe we've talked about the opening cinematic enough, and we should move on to the character customization. The character customization in this game is about as good as it was in Bloodborne, which was better than it was in Dark Souls 2, which was better than it was in Dark Souls 1. The only problem I really have with it is that with a keyboard and mouse, it's incredibly annoying to finagle, because it's designed for a controller and doesn't seem to really support the keyboard and mouse. In fact, I'm seeing a lot of console button prompts in this game, which should not be happening anymore because this is not Dark Souls 1's terrible port. This is Dark Souls 3. This should not be happening anymore. We've made 3 Dark Souls games on PC. The classes this time around are about as analogous as you could get to the classes from Dark Souls 1. The only thing of note to mention is that the warrior is a Viking and is therefore the best class, and if you disagree with me, you can get out now. The starting gifts are also very interesting. You can start off with what seems like a newbie trap piece of equipment, the life ring, which if you've played Dark Souls 1 you'll know is probably a lie, a variety of helpful consumable items, and a cracked red-eye orb if you want to invade people very early on in the game, which is a pretty interesting choice. My guess is that they wanted to give people an early taste of PvP if they're into that kind of thing and they're playing Dark Souls for the long run, which probably means that they're like Ouroboros or someone and they're playing this for PvP. After we finalize our character creation, we go into another in-game cinematic where we wake up from a grave. At this point in the game, I think the player can generally assume that this means we are in some way connected to the Lords of Cinder and may not be as much of a mook as I was saying earlier, because the opening cinematic stated that the Lords of Cinder were the ones who were waking up and the undead guys were just normal dudes. The unfit seemed to not be waking up for their graves and the fit seemed to do. Of course, we just started the game, so maybe we're wrong for now. And the next thing I want to talk about, which is a pretty controversial topic for the Dark Souls series, is the graphics. It's controversial because Dark Souls 1 looks terrible for a game made in 2011, and Dark Souls 2 obviously had its graphics downgraded from pre-release footage to what we have now. I'm happy to say that Dark Souls 3 not only looks really good, but even without video drivers on my machine, which is running on slightly older hardware, it runs at completely silky smooth 60 frames per second all the time. The port for this game is great, minus the occasional crashing. And by occasionally, I of course mean, all the time. I looked this crash up, and it turns out I'm not the only one suffering from it. This seems to be plaguing a lot of users here on PC. Here's the fix, just in case you're suffering from this issue and don't already know about this. You just have to simply turn your lighting quality down to low, not medium, low, and that will for some reason stop the game from crashing. I don't know what this bug is, but hopefully, by the time this recording is actually going out on YouTube, this will be fixed. And it wouldn't be the only thing, hopefully, because the online in this game is also very broken. I don't think I can put into words exactly how dysfunctional it is, so I'm just going to play some footage in the background while describing to you exactly what's going on with this. Seems like NPC animations and sometimes even player animations just don't work in online play. It also seems that enemies, including bosses, can't seem to strike phantoms, meaning that they can't do any damage to them, but they can aggro to them, meaning that a player can equip something like the Moaning Shield or use Alluring Skulls and aggro bosses without being able to get hit by them. And if the boss aggro's onto the host, then the phantom can just come up behind and attack the boss without any repercussions. If anything, the phantom would want to have aggro because that means that the player couldn't die, meaning like just as I'm showing you here, you can cheese certain bosses entirely, not just single mechanics, the entire fight, which is obviously a problem. The fact that the game is releasing with problems this absolutely destructive is in my mind no less than just a clear sign of negligence on the part of either Bamco or From Software. If you're looking to get into some online play, then maybe you should wait a little bit until you hear that this issue is fixed, which is assuming that it is by the time that this video goes out, and hopefully it will be. However, to get back on topic, let's go back to graphics. While graphical fidelity usually doesn't matter, this game has a lot of cool little details when it comes to its actual graphics. My current favorite being the fact that your last hit, on occasion, with a melee weapon on some enemies will actually cause a streak of blood to explode out of them in the direction that your sword was swinging on the last hit. The amount of blood is actually quite huge, and it's pretty satisfying to see it fly across the landscape, especially since it seems to permeate until you die or use a bonfire like everything else in the game, meaning that if you got lucky and you slaughtered a bunch of things in one room and you had blood flying all over the place, you can go back to that room if you really want to and just look at it again. It's such a small thing, but it's something I really like. However, I believe we talked enough about pragmatic things and we should start talking about the actual game. After the opening cinematic concludes, we wake up as well, which kind of makes me think that we're a Lord of Cinder, because they said they're the ones waking. It's confusing, let's not think about it. In the Ashen Cemetery. In my opinion, the Ashen Cemetery is actually a fantastic tutorial area. It allows you to either relearn or learn the basic mechanics of fighting in this game, and gives an initial taste of exploration and choice that isn't confusing to new players, even allowing for players to fight an optional mini-boss if they so choose. The skyboxes in this area are really pretty, and there's just something very distinctly Dark Souls about being able to see all the various areas around you that you can actually walk to. Of course, the enemies here aren't anything spectacular, but it's a tutorial area, so don't know what you expect. Another thing I really like about it is that it gives players who are willing to explore and fight more enemies actual rewards that they can use in-game. 4,000 plus souls and some Titanite is a pretty good start for a Dark Souls game. I just wish they would allow new players to actually level up from the bonfires in this area so that they could actually use these souls they acquired instead of possibly losing them to the first boss. Speaking of the first boss, I think he's a pretty decent, if kind of bland, introduction into this game's combat. The only thing interesting he really does in his fight is transform into this giant snake creature halfway in. Unfortunately, the snake creature is kind of annoying because it covers up the camera and it's way too big. After we kill the snake man, we acquire something called the coiled sword, which originally I thought was a piece of equipment, but is actually a key item. A key item whose description has me a little worried this early in the game, saying that it has something to do with teleportation. We walk up a small hill and into a large coliseum type thing, and we see a sight that is all too familiar for its own good. We walk into what is quite clearly a Demon's Souls style hub area, wherein for the third time we see the Maiden in Black. Not only has the Maiden in Black returned for the third time, but Andre of Astora, quite literally Andre of Astora, has returned for the second time. Not only have the Maiden in Black and Andre returned, but one of the old ladies from the beginning of Dark Souls 2 appears to be back as well. But not only that, the Crestfallen Warrior, albeit with a new voice actor this time around, has returned as well, meaning that of the 5 characters available in the hub at the beginning, 4 of them are repeat. But they're not the only things that are repeating in this. The hub area is quite literally just called the Firelink Shrine again. Seeing this game retread 4 major characters in one major location already has me a little bit on edge. Dark Souls 1 was a great game, but I don't think we should be retreading all of its elements over and over and over again. I found it not only uncreative, but incredibly unbelievable that Dark Souls 2 would have so many elements connected to the first one, despite it taking place in a supposedly different time period in a supposedly different land, and this game is already getting me skeptical about whether or not I'm actually going to get a creative new Dark Souls story, or if I'm just going to retread Dark Souls 1 again. However, at this point we don't know enough about the main plot to actually start judging anything, so I suppose I'll just get into this point later. There's other problems I have here. First off, the Maiden in Black's re-inclusion means that we're going back to Dark Souls 2's leveling system instead of the far superior Dark Souls 1 leveling system. For some reason, From Software insists that going to a bonfire, going through a loading screen, talking to an NPC with front-loaded dialogue, going back to a bonfire and going through another loading screen is somehow more efficient than just going to a bonfire. Additionally, having a blacksmith at the start of the game is kind of pointless since you don't have enough Titanite shards to actually do anything. Personally, I would have preferred if I could actually go out into the world and find the blacksmith and bring him back to the shrine like the other games allow you to do. Having the character actually be out in the world doing something before the player gets to them makes them feel like they're actually a part of the world instead of just a convenience. But then again, I guess if we were interested in actually having a character for this blacksmith, we wouldn't have made them Andre from Dark Souls 1, would we? In fact, every character at the start of the game just seems like a convenience rather than an actual character, except for the Lord. The last remaining Lord of Cinder is the only person who actually gives the player any amount of plot. He tells us that we are a seeker of lords and need to go get some kindling for the 5 thrones to become a Lord of Cinder to link the fire to preserve the world, which I assume our character must know about because we were at one point dead, meaning that we were at one point alive before all this, meaning that we were probably alive during the Age of Fire, which is some kind of Age of Prosperance. However, how are new players supposed to know what the Age of Fire is? The opening cinematic to Dark Souls 1 explains what the Age of Fire was, but it doesn't explain what the Age of Fire is to new players to Dark Souls 3. Then again, and I will once again get into this later, I think this game was not developed with new players in mind. However, I believe I've prolonged getting into the actual game world long enough. We put the coiled sword into the little bonfire thing and get to warp to our first area. For some reason, Dark Souls 3 would rather have the player warp into the world instead of just walking there like Dark Souls 1, which in my opinion makes the world feel disjointed and not really there, because what's the point of having an entire world laid out if you could just warp around it? However, this is at least the only time this happens, and you can walk to any other part of the world, which is nice. We warp into the first level, the High Wall of Lothric, which finally brings me to the topic of level design in Dark Souls 3. The actual level-by-level design in Dark Souls 3 is actually really great. I would say it's about as good, if not a little bit better than Dark Souls 1. Every single level is absolutely massive and expansive in every way. There's all kinds of optional stuff to go out and search, and there is a genuine amount of adventure to actually be had here in just exploring. The levels are also designed in a way to actually loop back around on themselves through shortcuts, which is great and is a fantastic return to form from Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2's level design was basically always just a long tunnel that ended in either a dead end with a boss fight, or a boss fight and a doorway leading to another tunnel with a dead end. I would say Dark Souls 3's is more like a branch, where there is one main path, but there's all kinds of stuff to do on the side that can always lead you back through it without having to just backtrack. Additionally impressive because the warping between bonfires is now open from the beginning of the game again like Dark Souls 2, but shortcuts are now actually useful. Item placement is also pretty decently considered, and while I haven't really found that many items in the early game that actually allow for A or even B scaling, most of the weapons seem at least somewhat more useful than they were in Dark Souls 2, which had all of its good items just stuffed away behind a ton of different levels. Unfortunately, enemy placement isn't as good this time around. Enemy placement in the early levels is great. Instead of just mobbing the player with a bunch of hard dudes that have a lot of status effects and hit really hard and fast, usually allowing skilled players to actually dissect certain parts of a level and take care of threats based on what they think is the most appropriate response, making getting through a level actually rewarding once you kill everything in it instead of frustrating because you know you're just going to end up running past everybody, beelining for all the items in the fog door. However, later on, most levels sort of just evolve into placing a lot of enemies or a lot of tough enemies and big mobs that are more annoying to deal with than they are actually skillful or challenging. This is one of the big problems I had with Dark Souls 2 because Dark Souls 2's entire enemy placement philosophy was just to place a bunch of dudes in a small area and let the player figure it out for themselves. Dark Souls' combat system works far better with one-on-one engagements or engagements with one or two enemies rather than having 4 or 5 guys swarm a player all at once. Our camera lock-on is incredibly heavy and focuses on one person, and most attacks the player can do while able to hit multiple enemies, sure, usually aren't designed for that kind of thing. There's also nothing mechanically interesting about fighting more people. The only difference between having one tough armored dude and having 2 tough armored dudes is the amount of uptime the player can actually attack in. Having the amount of time that the player can actually attack is not actually that interesting. It just means that the player takes twice as long to kill something. Placing multiple of the same enemy instead of making a more interesting encounter is basically just a cheap way to get the game to be harder instead of actually well designed. Because obviously Dark Souls is only meant to be difficult instead of a really good RPG, right? Before we move on to our next topic, I want to talk about one last thing with the level design, and that's the storytelling. Dark Souls' world storytelling has always been really amazing. At least Dark Souls 1's was. The placement of a lot of items usually was there to tell a story, such as what happened or what we assume happened with Kirk, what happened to Black Iron Tarkus, and the text on the doll that allows you to go into the painted world. Now this may just be my personal experience, but I didn't find anything like this. Most of the sets of armor I found were usually in some kind of chest as opposed to an actual corpse. And while there appears to be something going on with Farron's poison swamp and magic users, I don't really remember having the story of any phantoms told to me or anything like that. And yes, I did go back and look at all the items I owned and I read all of their descriptions and I still feel this way. The only NPC I'm not explicitly talking to and actually has any kind of story described in their items is Maneater Mildred 2.0, who drops the axe. However, the placement of props in Dark Souls 3 is actually pretty neat. Most of the time, instead of just being debris for players to roll through and destroy, a lot of times props will be placed in such a way that actually makes it feel like a world. Especially here in Yorv's High Wall, where a lot of chairs and things will be placed in locations where you could actually see somebody using them before everything in this location went to hell. My favorite being this open room here with the Lothric Knight. However, once again, this sort of gets thrown away later on in the game where levels seem to have less and less props and also seem to get shorter and shorter. I submit as evidence the Profane Capital, which is literally a hallway, 3 rooms full of enemies, and a boss door. Speaking of boss doors, let's talk about bosses in this game. Visually, the bosses in Dark Souls 3 are a little bit samey. Dark Souls 2 had this problem, and in fact, this problem actually exists not only in just the bosses, but for a lot of the enemies in the game as well. A vast majority of the bosses and an even vaster majority of the enemies you fight in Dark Souls 3 are usually just a dude in either tattered robes or armor. And for enemies, even when mechanically they're not functioning like just a dude in armor with some kind of weapon, they're still made up of some kind of humanoid part, like the human spider creatures in the Boreal Forest. And while mechanically this makes enemies very similar, at least the bosses are doing something really interesting this time around. From an actual mechanical standpoint, the bosses in this game are actually pretty varied, all doing something really neat. I can only really think of 2 bosses that don't do anything really that interesting. The Borean Dancer and Pontiff Sullivan. It's a good thing too, because the bosses in this game really aren't all that difficult. I killed a number of bosses on my first try. The only ones really killing me repeatedly are the Grave Watchers, Aldrich, and Pontiff Sulivan. I actually consider Pontiff Sulivan's fight to be the worst one, considering he doesn't do anything interesting other than swinging around two swords, and just seems like he was designed to be the hard fight. And I can tell I'm not the only one who had a lot of trouble with him because of the absolute sheer number of summoning signs I found when I went human in this area. His entire fight is basically just him having too much stamina and then spawning another him halfway in. This boss actually holds the record for the amount of attacks I've ever seen one enemy do in a single string at 9. Second place being held by his, or I guess its knights, at 7. See, the thing about a long combo is that it's not an interesting mechanic to deal with because it just revolves around you either blocking for a while and hoping you don't run out of stamina or just rolling a bunch. But aside from him, most bosses are doing something cool. For example, Vort of the Borean Tundra walks around like a dog and breathes ice. Yorm the Giant requires you to use a special sword that has an incredibly so special attack that you need to kill him, and the Grave Watchers can spawn Grave Watchers that attack them instead of you that you can use as a sort of semi-ally. Far more interesting than Dark Souls 2's bosses, which were basically just the same thing over and over and over again. However, difficulty isn't what makes a good Souls boss. Interesting mechanics is. Something like Dancer sure is hard because it does a lot of damage, but it's not as cool as Vonir. He teleports you into the abyss and has you attack certain parts of him. Dancer is just a straightforward fight that has a lot of spam. Speaking of things that are straightforward and have a lot of spam, an unfortunate carryover from Dark Souls 2 is that many boss doors just have a hallway full of enemies preceding them. One of the best things about Dark Souls and Demon Souls was that if you died at a boss, you had to respawn at your bonfire, and usually traverse most of the level and get back to the boss in good enough health to actually kill it. Sure, a lot of people were able to just run through a lot of the enemies, but encouraging this kind of behavior through your level design does not fix the problem. Your player should have to go back through about half the level or so, or actually have some amount of challenge after getting killed by the boss. That's their punishment. They have to go back through part of the level again. Placing them at a bonfire 30 feet away from the boss room with 4 enemies near it does not a challenge make. You may as well just remove the hallway and just put the fog door right next to the bonfire at that point. However, from a mechanical standpoint, this is the only problem I really have with the level design in Dark Souls 3. The only other problem I have with Dark Souls 3 is actually my main problem with Dark Souls 3, which we'll get into later. We've talked about fighting a lot of bosses in Dark Souls 3, so how is the combat this time around? Combat has a lot of new additions that I think really shake up the formula in a good way. Primarily the way Estus now work. Estus can be allotted to either be used as a healing item or as a magic restoration item. It's a great way to limit both your healing and your magic use in the same way that Estus limited healing back in Dark Souls 1. Additionally, Dark Souls 3 gets rid of all the extra healing items that Dark Souls 2 introduced, meaning that healing now actually has to be considered seriously, as does magic use. Dark Souls 3 also introduces weapon skills. Weapon skills basically have it so that your weapons provide some kind of special attribute or some kind of special unique move that you can only do if you're two-handing them or using a shield that also has the weapon skill. For example, my longsword can have me dash forward and stab people, but my greatsword lets me step on people. However, I think weapon skills truly shine with shields. Basically, parry is now a weapon skill, meaning that if you want a different weapon skill, you can't parry with your shield. And especially in the early game when most classes don't have a 100% physical blocking shield, it can be an interesting choice that the player has to make. Do they want to be able to block more reliably, or do they want to be able to occasionally get some crits? Aside from that, combat seems more or less the same from Dark Souls 1. Maybe it's a little bit floatier and a little bit more like Bloodborne, but again, I wouldn't really know. I'm not sure about balance for PvP, but personally I think it's kind of stupid to talk about PvP since that's going to be an ever-changing landscape, meaning that everything I say now may not be the case in a month. Since we're still on the topic of gameplay and online interaction, I think the last thing we really need to talk about is the Covenant system, which seems that it's just been given up on. Covenants are now just represented by a very small piece of interchangeable cloth in the player's inventory. Basically, you can just switch out your cloth and you've already switched out your faction. Very simple. While this is very nice and very convenient, I don't like the way it's being handled. Covenants were never good in Dark Souls, but they seem to be getting worse as time goes on. In Dark Souls 1, most Covenants didn't ever explain what they were to you. However, when you joined, it was sort of like signing an agreement. Basically, if you join the Covenant and you do what they want you to do, you'll get some kind of cool rewards specific to that Covenant. And if you leave a Covenant, you'll suffer some kind of consequence. Dark Souls 2 kept half of this by making it so that if you joined a Covenant and did what they wanted, they'd give you rewards, but there were no consequences for leaving any Covenants in Dark Souls 2. Basically, in Dark Souls 2, you just left Covenants and joined other ones to make the game slightly more convenient for yourself. Dark Souls 3 seems to have abandoned this notion. All the Covenants seem to do is just act as Covenants and nothing more. You don't seem to get any kind of rewards or suffer any kind of consequences if you leave or join or do what the Covenant wants you. The Covenants are also all repeated, so they're not even something new from the story perspective. And I think that that's all I really want to say about Dark Souls 3 mechanically. I mean, as a game, Dark Souls 3 is a pretty great game. It's worth your $60, and I imagine if I can get the online working, it'll be worth even more than that. And I kind of want to separate the video here. If you just want to know about whether or not you should buy Dark Souls 3 from a purely gameplay perspective, if you just want another Dark Souls game, go ahead and just stop the video now. I would say you can make a confident purchase that you are buying something better than Dark Souls 2 was. However, for those of us who still care about the story, the character interaction, interactions, and all the little things about Dark Souls continue on. Dark Souls 3 is a good game. It is, however, not a good Dark Souls game. Everything about it feels repetitive, and it feels tired. It's a clear sign of stagnation for the Dark Souls series, which has basically written itself into a corner. It's exactly what happens when you force someone to work in the same universe for 3 games when they only probably wanted to work in it for 1. It's very clear they didn't have enough actual new substance to sustain an entire new game, which is why Dark Souls 3 reborrows and reuses so much stuff from Dark Souls 1. The world, the plotline, and even some characters are directly copy-pasted out of the first game, and some other characters are re-included under a new name, such as Siegward of Katarina, who's totally different from Siegmeyer of Katarina because he's a dopey idiot who goes on a lot of adventures, just like Siegmeyer of Katarina. Or quite literally just Patches, and Andre, and the Man in Black, all once again. The game feels repetitive. It feels like I've been here before, and it feels like Dark Souls 3 just wants to go through the motions to get over with to be a Dark Souls game. I forewarned myself earlier in this video that I should be watching out for repetitive plot points and repeated things in this game, and here they are. There's absolutely no reason this game should have reused as much stuff unless Miyazaki and his team were just being lazy, or if Bamco rushed them and they had to be lazy. The adverse effect of having all this stuff be repeated is that it makes veteran players like me feel like we're just doing the same thing again, down to the very fine details. Dark Souls 2 did this too, but at least it actually felt like its own game because it had different characters and slightly different lore and a slightly different theme and a newer kingdom, and they had the fair enough decency to at least give a new voice actor and a new name to all the old characters. But even in that game, with the absolute sheer amount of analogous story and plot lines, felt like it was its own thing. Not a good thing, but its own thing. Dark Souls 3 has absolutely no identity of its own. All of the enemies are just generic dudes in either tatters or armor wielding big weapons that all look the same and start to blend together after a while. Most of the locations are either incredibly easily compared to other locations from previous entries of the series or are just blatantly stolen from them. They didn't bother to come up with any new factions or covenants in the entire game. Gear and weapons are reused in droves, down to their very icons being lifted out of Dark Souls 2, and certain enemies and even certain areas being reused from Dark Souls 1, obviously just to pander to nostalgia. At this point in the story, the Age of Fire is supposed to be some kind of ritualistic thing that people are doing every once in a while to prevent the ages from dying. We've had time to build up an entire new kingdom and to build an entire new shrine out of Firelink, but somehow Solaire's very specific set of armor that only he used is still available from birds, and various factions from the previous game are just re-included only for their functionality instead of being replaced by something possibly more interesting or more efficient. All this game had to do to fix the covenants from Dark Souls 1 would be to explain what they are to the player from a gameplay perspective right when they walk up to whoever wants them to join, to provide balanced rewards between each faction, and to make it so there's some kind of harsh penalty for removing yourself from a faction. But instead they decided to take the effortless easy route and just make it so you can switch in between each faction with a stupid piece of paper in its own equipable slot. And they couldn't even bother making it an actually new faction. We reused the Warriors of the Sun because everybody needs to see the Warriors of the Sun to know it's Dark Souls, and we can reuse the Way of the White and the Way of Blue because we already did those in previous games, so we may as well just do them again, right? It's not even just the story elements of this game that feel repetitive. Certain segments of gameplay also feel like they were lifted out of the Dark Souls What Everybody Did Once handbook, like having the player run across an incredibly thin catwalk while being shot at by Silver Knights with great bows, and giving the player the ability to stand under a bridge to save themselves from the fire of an upwards dragon and shoot at them with a bow. Perhaps you could say this is to give new players the same sense of adventure that Dark Souls 1 players had back when they first played that game. But obviously this can't be the case because a new player hasn't yet had explained to them what the Age of Fire exactly is or why it's good. Also, you're never going to give a new player the exact same experience that an old player of Dark Souls 1 was going to get. Why would you do that when you could give everybody a new adventure by creating an entirely new game with more unique, identifiable elements that actually make up a whole new Dark Souls game instead of just making another Dark Souls? As a veteran player, I should be expecting just as much new adventure as a new player would be expecting. I mean, sure, I expect them to reuse a couple of weapons or armor sets here and there, and I obviously know the mechanics already, but I still expect some sense of adventure, of which Dark Souls 3 has absolutely none. I mean, to be fair, this is the Dark Souls game where you're not allowed to choose where you're supposed to go at first, and you simply start where FromSoft tells you, instead of having a world design that interconnects upon itself and allows the player to skip to certain areas from other areas, and to loop back around again. Every area simply leads to another area, like this is Mario. Dark Souls 1's massive, seamless open world was one of the best things about that game, coming from Demon Souls in my personal opinion. And while Dark Souls 3 sure does allow you to go from one area to another without loading, that's pretty much all you can do. You can't go in between areas. You go from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, as if you were following a road, which has another adverse effect on that supposed adventure we're supposed to be having for new players. players. When Dark Souls 1 started off with multiple occasions, it trusted that the player had enough intelligence to stop going to the place that was getting them killed. But now in Dark Souls 3, we don't seem to have that much trust in the player, and we're basically just going to start them off where we think they should go and let them figure it out from there. Excuse me, I misspoke. I mean not figure it out from there. Beside the point that Dark Souls 3 is already trampling all over the point and plot of Dark Souls 1 and simply reusing everything it can from that game without sheer plagiarism, Dark Souls 3's plotline is also handled far more poorly than it was in the first game. In Dark Souls 1, we were given the task of a dying man who saved our lives to go and ring the bell of awakening because we think something good will happen. He tells us a family story about the legacy of the undead, about a prophecy of how the undead, both us and him, are destined to go out and seek the bells of awakening where we'll know our true cause. This is a pretty great motivation for both characters and players alike because it's the dying request and last words of a guy who just broke you out of the worst jail on Earth. To this end, we escape the undead asylum and go out and actually seek the bells of awakening themselves, but we don't know where they are. So being the actual useful character he was in Dark Souls 1, the crestfallen warrior actually tells us where we should be looking. After we go out and ring both bells, we come back to the shrine because we have no idea what we're supposed to be looking for, and we go back and we see Frampt, who explains to us that the Age of Fire can once again be rekindled by our hands, which we as a player know is generally a good thing because we're explained it in the opening cutscene. Frampt sends us to acquire the Lord Vessel, and explains to us that with the Lord Vessel we can collect all of the souls of the Lords and go and enter the Kiln of the First Flame to once again bring about the Age of Fire. I know that there's a lot more to Dark Souls' plot than that, and I'll get into that later, but for a new player, for your first time, that's basically the gist. In Dark Souls 3, we're never explained what exactly the Age of Fire is or why we should like it. The opening cinematic doesn't even so much as provide a picture or a description of what the Age of Fire is supposed to be like to give a new player any amount of reason to care about it. You're just supposed to accept that the Age of Fire is a good thing without knowing anything about it. You wake up from being dead, and then you go kill a random dude in armor, and then you walk into some kind of circle that has 4 random people dotted all around it. Then, if you so choose, you talk to this goofy fucker here, and it gives you some cryptic pseudo-medieval dialogue about how you need to go and find the other 3 lords and kill them, about how he's also a lord and he's not going to move away from his throne just in case, just to make your life a little bit easier. So then, on a hunch that the Age of Fire is a good thing that you want, you go out and kill the hallowed remains of 3 of the most powerful beings in the land. Once you're done with that, you get contacted by some woman you talked to maybe like 20 hours ago, who for some inexplicable reason decides to teleport you right out of one boss encounter into another, probably just to get you killed. She explains that you need to go find the prince. We kill the Boreal Dancer, assumably because he killed her, or it killed her. We then go through Lothric Castle, fight another dude in armor, but this time with air support. Once we find the prince, he actually gives us a pretty interesting ultimatum. He tells us that for some reason he also doesn't like the fact that the Age of Fire has been persisting so much, and that we should just give up and let it fade. The only interesting thing I find about this, which I think makes it wholly interesting, is the fact that the game suggests that you just stop playing and have that be your ending. Now that might just be my own warped interpretation of what this person is trying to get across here, but I'm going to just assume that that's what the game wants me to do for now because I have no evidence to suggest otherwise. Now assuming that this is the case and these bosses really would rather just have the player give up, I personally would have made it so these bosses weren't hostile at the beginning of their fight. Like Gloria never just jumps on the player immediately. If the player just decides not to fight them, then they just decide not to fight them and that's it. That being the give up ending. Like obviously the player wouldn't be able to progress the rest of the game because they haven't killed Lorien, and if they do attack Lorien, then obviously they're going for the Length of Fire ending. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and Lorien just attacks the player like any other boss. Now, because we promised to see this game through and through, I'm going to kill Lorien and move on. We kill Lorien, who alone has a pretty good fight, and then he's like resurrected by his brother, and then you have to fight them both at the same time, and Lothric gives us a little speech about how we're going to remain accursed. And now we have all the kindlings of all the lords, so we're done, right? Well, almost. And as if we didn't already take enough things from Dark Souls 1, this game also ends at the Kiln of the First Flame, which of course we traveled to through teleportation, even though if this is Firelink Shrine, and this is the Kiln of the First Flame, we should have just gone down some stairs. Anyway, we go and kill the Soul of Cinder, which is some random dude in armor, like a skeleton with a falchion or something, who after an entire boss fight literally just turns into Gwyn. I'm not even kidding. He copies his moveset, he copies his music. It's pathetic. Remember how I said Pontiff Sulyvahn was the worst fight in this game? Guess what? I lied, because the first phase of his fight is just a bunch of player movesets, and then the second phase of his fight is literally another boss from the previous games. But it's not just any boss, it's Gwyn. The reason that the Gwyn fight worked so well in Dark Souls 1 is because you knew who Gwyn was. His role in the world was explained as one of the four lords in the opening cinematic, and around the world, in a lot of often thematically important moments, he was mentioned, or at least obviously associated. Like the fight with Ornstein and Smough, where a statue of his is clearly visible inside of the boss room, and afterwards, if you read the armor sets of the people that you just killed, you'll learn that Ornstein was one of Gwyn's 4 super knights. But not only that, right after you defeat Ornstein and Smough, you meet Gwyn's, or a vision of Gwyn's daughter, or family member of some description, Guinevere. Not only that, if you explore around Anor Londo more, you can find the fight with Dark Sun Gwyndolin. You can see him using the lightning spears, so when you use a lightning spear in the game, you can immediately assume that he has something to do with their creation, and Frampt, a character we talked to a lot in Dark Souls 1, worked under him, and the task that he actually gives us is to replace him. The fight that leads up to Gwyn is not only thematically important, but even thematically interesting when you actually get inside the fight, because as strong as Gwyn was, and as strong as what's left of him is, you realize this is just the husk of what was once a much mightier opponent. He's the only boss in that entire game that can actually be parried, which shows just how weak Gwyn has gotten, and just how weak maybe the rest of the entire world has gotten with him. It almost makes you feel like you're putting the old man down, which helps to make the fight incredibly depressing, just like the rest of Dark Souls 1. This fight has none of that. Assuming you never played Dark Souls 1, this Soul of Cinder guy just comes out of nowhere and seems to just respawn his own health bar. This music means nothing to someone who's never heard it in Gwyn's fight, and his moveset also means nothing to someone who's never fought Gwyn. And to people who have played Dark Souls 1, this just comes off as soulless pandering to try to get you to remember how much greater that game was than this one is. And then the game ends the exact same way Dark Souls 1 ends for the vast majority of people who first played that game. You sacrifice yourself supposedly to the fire so that you can rebirth the Age of Fire once again. The credits roll and you're over. Now I decided to go and look on the Wikipedia to find the other endings to this game because I knew for a fact there had to at least be a couple. Luckily there are, and however they suck. They're all just cryptic and stupid, and honestly they don't matter. The only Dark Souls game's ending that actually ever mattered was Dark Souls 1. So now that we've gotten through the story of Dark Souls 3, let me just make one little minor criticism before I get into that thing I told you about earlier. Dark Souls 3's storyline is so boring. Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 storylines usually had at least one main character interacting with them at certain points in the game after certain events had happened. Let me contrast the Maid in Green from Dark Souls 2 and the Maid in Black in Dark Souls 3. All the Maid in Black in Dark Souls 3 tells us is to warp into Lordaeron or Lothric or whatever the hell we're calling it now, and then to warp back out over to the Firelink Shrine. In Dark Souls 2, the Maid in Green actually appears in multiple places and helps the player in more ways than just leveling up. She appears once in the Dragon area and then once right before the end of the game to help explain her story a little bit. Of course, that doesn't save Dark Souls 2's story any, but at least it's there. Dark Souls 3's story is just a repeat of the first game, without even understanding what the theme of the first game was. This is the point I wanted to make about Dark Souls 1's plot that I didn't make earlier. Dark Souls 1 has two endings, the Link the Fire ending, and the Age of Mankind ending. Dark Souls 1's entire game was about an age, and possibly even this entire kingdom and surrounding kingdoms all together. The whole world may even be ending. Dark Souls 1 talked a lot about fire. Bonfires were where you respawned, Estus flasks are orange. The current time that we're operating in is called the Age of Fire, and an entire new branch of magic was born in the form of pyromancy. This isn't just an aesthetic choice, however, there's a thematic reason that this is the case. Dark Souls 1's entire message was that eventually everything is going to die. Nothing lasts forever. Fire is an obviously good analogy for this because fires don't last forever. Eventually, they have to burn out. Embers being a sign of a fire that's dying, and ash being the sign of what was fire. That's why the Kiln of the First Flame is such a powerful area in Dark Souls 1. Everything in the entire place is covered in ash, to signify the fact that not only is this marking the end of the game, but also the fact that this is pretty much marking the end of the world. The Kiln of the First Flame was probably once a place of incredibly bright fires, and is now nothing more than a wasteland full of ruins and ash. And just in case that message wasn't entirely clear for a player, the boss of that area is Gwyn. Gwyn, the once mighty Lord of Cinder, now turned into just a hollow like everybody else. Just like fire, Gwyn eventually was going to die too, and just like fire, the Age of Fire was eventually going to burn itself out. Every major lore character, aside from Frampt and the player, that attempted to relink the fire and keep the Age of Fire going had some kind of horrible fate befall them, like the Witch of Izalith who got turned into the bed of chaos. That's why the Link the Fire ending in Dark Souls 1 is perceived as the bad one. Frampt is just tricking the player into relighting the Age of Fire, knowing very well that this will all repeat itself. No matter how strong the player's character was, they would never be able to sustain the Age of Fire forever. Eventually, the darkness would consume the world no matter what anybody has to say about it, and Fram's attempts at keeping the fire going by adding more and more fuel to it are pointless and foolish, because it can't go on forever. That's why ushering in the Age of Mankind is seen as the better option for the world of Dark Souls 1, to finally put the Age of Fire to rest and begin anew. And while the depressing thing is that one day the Age of Mankind will also fade, at least the reality of this has been accepted. Dark Souls 3 reuses this entire plotline without actually understanding this. Apparently the Age of Fire will never end as long as we sacrifice enough people to it, and I can't tell why they went this route. Either Miyazaki is lazy, or Bamco didn't want him to actually put in any work to make an entirely different Dark Souls game, possibly to avoid the community backlashing against Dark Souls 3 not being Dark Souls 1+1. Or maybe this is some kind of brilliant meta-commentary, showing that this series' slow degradation from Dark Souls 1 is a result of trying to keep that game going on forever. Perhaps a little bit of revenge on Miyazaki's part at Namco for making him work on the same game 3 times. Or maybe Miyazaki knew that if he actually tried to make a new game, an entirely new game with a new message, then people wouldn't accept it. Because everybody knows if you ask someone what they want, all they want is a better thing of what they already have. Or maybe I'm reading far too into this and Miyazaki is just uncreative and didn't have anything for the third game. Considering Bloodborne, a game that actually decided to detach itself from the Dark Souls franchise, actually was a pretty great success and has a pretty decent story that I've read up on instead of played, I'm going to place my dubious trust in Miyazaki and say that this is actually just meta instead of bad. There was never supposed to be a Dark Souls 2, the same way that there never should have been a Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls was never meant to be a franchise. The very story goes against the notion of there being sequels to Dark Souls that have anything to do with Dark Souls. And if there had to exist a Dark Souls 2 and 3, the best you could have done is made their stories have nothing to do with Dark Souls 1 and to have their own messages away from that game. Unfortunately, we haven't. Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 just blindly reuse things and elements from Dark Souls 1 without having the same meaning, which means either that Dark Souls 2 and 3 never had a theme, or that they're going with the same theme from Dark Souls 1, which makes them hypocrites. Though I know deep down that it's probably the former, that Dark Souls 3 never had a theme and never was going to have a theme at any point in development. This game just feels like it's going through the motions for Dark Souls at this point. It wildly reuses the same characters, the same story, the same areas, certain gameplay encounters, and even a boss. Dark Souls 3 just feels incredibly phoned in, and it's very clear that at this point Dark Souls has become creatively bankrupt. So much so that even halfway into the game it starts to reuse its own enemies instead of just enemies from previous Dark Souls games. The entirety of Lothar Castle introduces one new enemy in the form of the healing priests, every other enemy just being a buffed up version of the normal soldiers from the earlier levels. And it's not just that one area that does this. The Grand Archive also reuses the small dudes from the Undead Settlement. And then to cap it all off, we reuse Gwyn as the final boss. Except that it's not Gwyn, it's Gwyn again. And that right there almost signifies exactly what I hate about this game, is that it's just Dark Souls again, when Dark Souls was never supposed to have an again. Like I said way earlier in this video, I prefer it when the Dark Souls games actually strike out with their own vision and have their own theme and their own world and their own continents and their own characters, completely detached from previous entries. Because Dark Souls 1 wasn't a game that was supposed to be built up with a sequel, it was supposed to end. And it's quite ironic and quite sad that this is what happened to the series. It's almost like we took the Link the Fire ending in real life, constantly trying to rekindle everyone's love for Dark Souls 1 instead of just going out and doing our own new thing. Dark Souls 3 embodies this in every way. It lacks the story, the adventure, and the interesting characters from Dark Souls 1, and it spends way too much time constantly trying to remind the player that Dark Souls 1 exists instead of trying to be its own thing. I don't believe I've ever seen this much pandering in a video game before, and I hope I never see it again. My eyes may have well just rolled out of my head the moment I saw the Iron Helm and the Xanthos crown once again for no inexplicable reason other than the fact that they were in Dark Souls 1. And that's basically the entire game. It just exists the way it does because Dark Souls 1 exists and everyone really likes Dark Souls 1, so we better do it again. Mechanically, I can't complain about Dark Souls 3. It's a good video game, don't get me wrong. Once this video is over, I plan on starting up a new character that's more inclined towards PvP and trying to figure out if I can fix the animations, and getting back into the Dark Souls I know and love, because at the end of the day, I'm probably the only person who cares about the first time playthrough and the story of Dark Souls 3 when everyone really just wants to get to the PvP so they can make their awesome montage videos. However, Dark Souls 1 to me was a lot more than just a game on my first playthrough. It felt like a world. It felt like an actual adventure because the world made sense, physically intertwining in multiple ways, dotted with characters that I could meet and help and watch die as I journey across the land. It opened up with a lot of player choice and allowed me to tackle my objectives the way I wanted. It was an incredibly massive game that trusted that the player would have to figure out everything about it on their own without any kind of help, and originally was one of the best stories I'd ever seen in a video game, not just in the main story but in the way it told all of its little side stories. The world building in Dark Souls 1 was fantastic, the lore was great, and the story was awesome, because it was consistent and it meant something. Dark Souls 3 doesn't mean anything. Dark Souls 3's story doesn't mean anything unless this actually is some kind of meta commentary about how Dark Souls should have never had a sequel. I'm going to be positive and just assume that it is. And even if it is, everything else about Dark Souls 3 has just become so formulaic. Probably because after the third game, people might get a little tired of this exact structure being followed over and over and over again. Especially problematic because for the last two games, we've unnecessarily reused things that didn't need to be reused from the first game. If Dark Souls 2 and 3 had drastically different and more creative stories, worlds, and lore than Dark Souls 1, and more than they already have, I would be fine with recurring gameplay mechanics and level design and other parts of the formula. I expect the game to play the same as Dark Souls 1 did, at least relatively so, but I also want to see a new story that doesn't make this game feel like it's Dark Souls 1. I want another game that feels like it's in the Dark Souls universe. I don't want another Dark Souls 1. I hate to quote Matthew Matosis here, but what he said of Dark Souls 2 is the same of Dark Souls 3. The main problem with Dark Souls 3 is that it has no fucking soul. Dark Souls 3 could have been great. It could have been truly a third Dark Souls game, one with its own story and world and new characters that mystify the experience the same way Dark Souls 1 did. New and old players alike could samely experience a new magical look into the world of Dark Souls, but instead what we're doing is mirroring Dark Souls 1 for veteran players and providing a poorly explained and motivationless story for newer players who don't know about Dark Souls 1. Perhaps my thoughts on this are just partially being born from the fact that I've played Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 already, and even though I played Dark Souls 3 the same way I played Dark Souls 1 and 2, actually going around and adventuring and exploring, it just doesn't feel the same. Doubly ironic because it feels too samey. Like I've said over and over again in this video, Dark Souls 3 is just Dark Souls 1 again, and that's the problem. The only way the Dark Souls series is going to stop stagnating this way is if we actually stop making Dark Souls 1 and decide to go on with some new lore, abandoning everything with fire. Just imagine for yourself, if you will, a Dark Souls game that doesn't reuse bonfires and the Age of Fire and all this other crap. The same game but with an entirely new experience. I want that Dark Souls game to exist, but unfortunately I doubt it ever will. At least not while it's called Dark Souls. I imagine that the best thing I can hope for is that From Software leaves Bamco Studios behind and goes on to create another series of Souls games under a new name that actually has some creativity to them. Bloodborne is proof that this formula can work if you just shake up the story, and Dark Souls 3 is proof that when you don't shake up the story, you risk just being a repetitive iteration of your first game, which is exactly what Dark Souls 3 is. As far as whether or not you should purchase this game, here's my thoughts on it. It's Dark Souls again. Whatever that means to you, it means to you. I know for a lot of people, all of what I've just talked about probably doesn't matter, which is why I put the disclaimer halfway into this video. Again, if you're just looking for a purely mechanical Dark Souls game, you're gonna find this and you're gonna love this. But if you're one of the people like me who was concerned about the finer details of Dark Souls, well then you're not going to find anything new here. And that's just the tragic thing, isn't it? A new Dark Souls game with nothing new in it. And hopefully this will be the last one too. Maybe, just maybe if I'm lucky, Dark Souls will either reinvigorate itself with an entirely new game, or, much like a fire, will eventually burn itself out. I just want to give a quick thanks to everybody who made it to this point in the video. I know a lot of people don't really like watching longer critique videos. They're not exactly as popular as quicker ones that generalize the entire game that they're playing. So when I see people have actually watched through the whole video, I get a little giddy inside. Hopefully it means I'm doing a good enough job of entertaining people for the next, like, 40 minutes. If you'd like, you could probably find some other videos of mine if you like this one, like in the sidebar. You know, you can click on them if you want. I'm not gonna tell you what to do. And if you have a problem with this video or you want to tell me that I'm doing a good job, tell me so in the comment section, because that's the only place where I can actually, like respond and learn. If you just, like, dislike the video, like, I don't know what the fuck just disliking the video means. I don't know what the fuck that does. Hell, if you don't like this video, you shouldn't dislike it, because that makes it go up higher in YouTube search rankings. So you're just helping people see it. That's not good. That's not what you want if you don't like me. That's dumb. And I think that's all I have to say for now, because I'm, kind of tired. I'm gonna go get some water because my throat is really fucking dry and I think I have strep, so, you know, see ya. Hello everyone, and welcome to my video on a Nier Automata. If you're concerned about the length of this video, well, first off, I apologize. Sincerely, you have to believe me when I say I tried to cut this video down as much as I could. And also to note that this has been split into 4 major chapters to make this video remotely more digestible. This video was written with the intent of discussing the game to an audience that has already played it and contains spoilers for pretty much every single thing of significance. If you have any urge to play and finish this game and haven't done so yet, do not continue watching this video. You will get spoiled.
do not think you could go into this without having the plot ruined for you, because you can't. Continue at your own discretion. I have a very long introduction for this video, relatively, one I suggest you watch, but if you want to just skip it, then go to the on-screen time to start talking about the game. Nier Automata, as you probably and hopefully know, is the latest in the Nier/Drakengard series of video games developed, or more so directed, by oddball game director Yoko Taro, who is well known among what was originally a very niche set of gamers for his exceptional and interesting direction of video games that doesn't really follow standard convention. His games have generally flown under the radar until now. It's no surprise to anyone that Automata is the most popular Nier game yet, and I, like many people, have jumped on the bandwagon with its latest release. And I think that's important to know so that everyone can understand my background of where I'm coming from when reviewing this game. I confess that I'm a big noob when it comes to Nier, but luckily for me, I have two friends who are big Nier fans who helped guide me on this journey and provided me pointers on exactly what's important to look at for this game back before it had released. I've compiled these major points into a list of commandments that were my basis for expectations regarding Automata, because very luckily for myself, I was not one of the people who bought this game because of 2B's mass market appeal. Made the obvious 2B ass joke in first 5 minutes check. These commandments are as follows. First off, Yoko Taro is a weirdo. He will do things that you do not expect. Secondly, this is the first Nier game to have a proper budget and to have generally good gameplay mechanics because it was directed by Yoko Taro and developed by action game giant Platinum Games, made famous for Bayonetta and, to the PC audience, Metal Gear Rising. This is actually a very interesting point of analysis because it means that Automata is very much a giant of two heads. On one set of shoulders we have to look at Yoko Taro's work as the creator of Nier, and on the other set we have to look at Platinum Games' work as a part of their history of spectacle fighters. Third, Yoko Taro will make his games mediocre on their first playthrough, but the game gets better if you play it twice because there's a lot of details that are revealed if you complete the game again. At least that's all I thought back in January. What do I know now, right? Fourth, Yoko Taro's games are generally rather depressing, or at the very least grim overall. Fifth, Nier Automata was created with the ability to be played separate from Nier Replicant or Gestalt, which looking back was the smartest possible choice because Nier Gestalticant, which I affectionately call N1ER, was not nearly as popular as Automata is. And of course, reserving a story for a game not even 1/5 of this game's audience ever played would have been somewhat of a disaster for everyone who wasn't already a fan. Now, when I first began writing this script, I had only completed one complete playthrough of all 5 major endings in Automata, and I had somewhat of an urge to kind of spill my guts right here at the beginning about, well, what I thought about the game, in a very unfocused, reactionary way. I could safely say that very few games are like Nier. It's been a roller coaster of quality for me, with some of the peaks being something I hope to treasure for the rest of my gaming career, and some of the valleys really making me question Yoko Taro and the games industry. I have a lot to talk about with this game, as you can probably see. My original notes for this game led me to places and topics that I never thought I'd really be smart enough to ever tackle in a video. Like the difference in design philosophy between strange Western and Eastern developers, whether or not Yoko Taro is a good game director at all, and whether or not games should even have cutscenes anymore. And above all else, if Nier Automata was even a good game. I had spent at this moment just shy of 50 hours playing it, which actually did triple by the end of this script, and unlike games such as, I hate to keep using this damn word, Fallout 4 or Garry's Mod, which I could tell you exactly what I think about in a heartbeat, and have 4 or even 40 times more playtime than I did in Nier, this game still had me torn. I originally described it by saying that if I had to give a description of the game right now, I'd say I'd give Nier a grade of an A-. An A- with an extra minus for every major problem I had, an A-, whatever, however many minuses, but never enough minuses to take this game to a B+. And when I started making this video, I really had nowhere to start from, or at least nowhere comfortable to start from, so I've decided to construct this video by looking at every chapter of the game, on their own, but at the same time with intertwining information. And that the only comfortable place I found starting at was at, well, where everything starts at, the beginning. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Nier Automata. The first path that you can complete in Nier Automata is Path A, which is the start of the game by all counts. Nier Automata opens up with a prologue sequence, starting off with a blank white screen where an unknown character narrates some very cryptic dialogue to us. She says this:
"Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment? I often think about the god who blessed us with this cryptic puzzle, and wonder if we'll ever have the chance to kill him."
Now, before we can continue any further, we already have to stop and talk. This dialogue here is of some very major significance, but not for a long time. It's, in fact, somewhat of a style, or I guess the nature of Nier Automata. A lot of things are significant, but in retrospect. Instead of spilling my topics and guts out to explain why in the very first minutes of this review, I have written this video more or less to mirror some of the thoughts I had when I was first playing these moments myself. I think it would be less annoying to hear first impressions rather than hearing "but we'll get into that later" 110 times. Now, the first time I had heard this dialogue, my mind was racing with a bit of possibility. I had heard that Yoko Taro was a weirdo game dev, but I had not yet understood how, and as a big fan of Western metagames, or as we call them here, weird games, whatever you want to really call it, I don't care, and I was expecting a lot of weirdness to hit from my comfort zone. I thought that the god could be the player for rushing the characters into battle and death however many times over the course of their playthrough, or that the god could be the game's creator, or some other kind of fourth wall breaking storytelling, but all these concerns will be put to rest and burial in a few moments, and will then be reburied in a few hours. As we continue with the prologue, we transition into a cutscene with an overhead view of some clouds and a focus on some kind of a robot, or a plane maybe, that's flying overhead. It's here that we're introduced to a few characters: our narrator and main character known as 2B, 2B's operator known as 6-0, and a few other members of 2B's squadron of aviators. We're babbled on about some general jargon from our operator about collecting data and how we've entered the mission area, and we get our mission objective. We're to take down something known as a Goliath-class unit. While this conversation is being carried out, one of our squadron members is shot down by some kind of laser artillery, and we engage manual controls, thusly starting the game. At this point in Nier, it's easy to see that the game is a top-down shoot-'em-up or bullet hell game like Galaga or Toho or something similar. We continue through the skies while our team slowly gets picked off by what seem like relatively easy to dodge attacks, and this generally solidifies the idea that we're the only important person here and that everyone around us is pretty incompetent. We fly around for a little while doing our shoot-'em-up thing until this happens.
Multiple surrounding enemy air units confirmed. Requesting permission to assume mobile configuration. Permission granted.
Yes, the game switches genre from top-down shmup to a twin-stick shooter, and it does it incredibly elegantly. All that really changes is the camera angle. This was the first amazing thing I had seen about Nier, and it was rather impressive. This happens multiple times throughout this prologue. We go from top-down shmup to twin-stick shooter to third-person shooter to side-scrolling shooter, and the real game hasn't even started. This is prevalent throughout the entire game as well, with more genres we'll talk about as they come, but I have to say that I can absolutely, with complete certainty, say that this is one of the best parts about Nier Automata. The game swaps between so many different kinds of game, and it's all incredibly seamless, fluid, smooth, whatever buzzword synonym you want to use it, it applies. All that happens when a switch occurs is that the camera will change position, the enemies will be placed according to that change, and the way that the bullets can be directed changes. Nothing else actually changes, which is the most important part. All of the level design and the core mechanics of the game are kept just as they were before, they're just playing on it from a new perspective, literally, and it's incredible. The team at Platinum outdid themselves. They crafted a set of core mechanics that were so beautifully simple and easy to work with that not only could it be applied onto multiple different games at once, but you could cycle these games from one to another with no transition and the mechanics still work. The level design is the same. All of these spaces in Nier could have been explored from its usual third-person action game perspective, but they can also work just as well, if not better, from a different camera angle. The camera work here is probably the best that I have ever seen. Just the fact that you can change genre simply by moving the camera around is fantastic, and I think it all comes down to the game's bullet hell mechanics. I said that these were incredibly simple, and they really are, but it's simplicity in its greatest form. Basically, it comes down to this. You can shoot bullets, and the enemy can shoot two types of bullets. Your bullets are not only unfairly faster than the enemies, their bullets are unremarkably slow and easy to dodge just by walking around. And your bullets can even destroy enemy bullets, if they are the orange/pinkish ones. The enemy, like I said, has two types: orange shots and purple shots. Instead of shooting down the orange-pinkish shots, which will consume both bullets in the engagement, you can only shoot through the purple energy. You cannot in any way destroy it unless you have a melee attack. And some bosses will have a reddish-purple bullet which you just have to avoid. The real engaging part of Nier is how this simple concept is put to the test, how bullets are fired at you and in what patterns, of which there are very many because the game oftentimes will play with their properties, like just for example, Simone's gravity-based bouncy ball attack, where you can go to avoid these bullets and how fast you can kill the enemies firing them, when you can attack while they're in play. Like any bullet hell game, it's about the dodging. Shooting the enemy is easy and is pretty much an afterthought when compared to avoiding damage, because a dead player doesn't do anything. Again, it's incredibly simple when you're thinking about it, but it's not a matter of thinking, it's a matter of dexterity and perceptiveness. Finding the right place to be in at the right time so you don't soak up a big fat plasma shell. But again, that's to this game's advantage. The more complex a mechanic is, the more dependent it is on being played from the angles or perspectives it was conceived in, because you just start coming up with more and more little clauses and tiny details that form a fleshed out system. And of course, this is fine. Most of the best games ever made are made by taking a simple concept and refining it into a well-polished and incredibly deep challenge of skill or brains. But these systems start to fall apart once you make something as drastic as a change in the camera. In fact, I'd go as far to say that there is not a more drastic change that could be made. Imagine if you could play something like Counter-Strike from a third-person angle, allowing you to see around corners without putting yourself in danger. Imagine playing a real-time strategy from the first-person view of a foot soldier, or as a general atop the command tower. Imagine playing chess as a side-scroller. See what I mean? The fact that Platinum made something that could be put under the stress of such a massive change in design multiple times, in real time, in multiple ways, and still come out working just the same and as well as it did before is pretty amazing. It takes a changing camera angle from a massive shift in design to just a change in my controls. I think it all really comes down to the fact that your little pod here acts as a gun in the third-person action sequences, giving the team a reason for the protagonist to be able to participate in the bullet hell no matter where they are. Because the game even mixes genres on top of swapping them. It's crazy. And all they have to do is change the properties of the bullets, sometimes, and once again, the angle that you can fire at, and voila! Another clever thing they do with these perspective changes is hide parts of the map behind the pseudo-screen edge that you think is present, cause once again, nothing about the level design is different, just the camera. It could be more in-depth, or a more detailed system, sure, but I'm glad it's not. It's very engaging despite there not being very much to it, and the fact that there isn't much to it gives it this amazing versatility. If you came up to a series of different game developers and told them to make a game about not getting hit by a projectile, you'd get a wide variety of results because it's such a flexible mission statement. Try the same thing with, make a top-down strategy game based on reflecting bullets back into enemies and rewinding time, and obviously you'll get a much more rigid set of results. There's beauty in simplicity, and Nier proves it. I think the most interesting thing, however, is that it's the main game of Nier that is changing. A lot of games, especially open-world games from here in the West, are known for having mini-games that are different genres but act as a refreshing distractor from the main gameplay loop, like gathering plants or picking locks or any of the infinite number of different examples that exist. But with Nier, it is the whole game that changes. Now, earlier I mentioned something about an action game, and we're about to get into that, don't worry. Once our squadron is thoroughly wiped out, except for us, we're told by 6-0 to go and rendezvous with someone called Unit 9S, and to keep carrying out our mission. We crash our flight unit into the building we've been flying towards, and the real character of 2B is revealed, to the delight of all people who are going on a waifu drought. By the way, shout out to all of the other 0.1% of Steam users who don't have the achievement for looking up 2B's skirt. We shall all die as pure as we lived. This is where the game finally reveals its true genre, a spectacle fighter, Platinum Games' specialty. I'm not really the person who has any real right to determine this, considering I've only ever played MGR, but I have to say that of all of the other Platinum games, I think that Nier shares the most strings with MGR. but with some obvious changes. The bullet hell mechanics are still present, even in the spectacle fighting mode, and this is something that I'm very glad to see. Bullet hells mixing with action games is a concept I always thought would work. I've even tested it in my own game prototypes, and it's great to see someone with an actual budget and a skill to make a good argument for its existence. It works the same way as it does in every other part of the game, and fits just as naturally. When we enter the building, we kill some small bad guys and soon come face to face with our first mini-boss, a giant and seemingly sapient excavation arm. On my first playthrough of Automata, I tried hard mode because generally I think that's where someone of my level of expertise should always start, especially considering most games' hard mode isn't really that hard. Nier Automata, however, has a very different interpretation of hard and makes the difficulty spike from medium to hard absolutely ludicrous. You won't properly see it here, at least not yet, but the spike in damage is insane. This is where I first died in this prologue sequence, and when you die here, well, you start from the very beginning, almost like a spiral of life and death. And it very much is a spiral because a lot of people's pride, but totally not mine, guys, I promise I didn't spend 2 hours here, will get them stuck in this prologue sequence as they keep trying and trying and trying in what is pretty much a vain effort. And it really frustrates people because you have to go through 5 minutes of unskippable crap before you get another stab at this boss who can kill you in one hit and very easily. Unless, of course, you swallow that pride and go down to normal mode. This is where the platinum in the game kind of phases out for a moment and the Yoko Taro phases in, because apparently Yoko Taro is just the kind of person who really likes to fuck with reviewers, and intentionally try to skewer his review scores because he thinks it's funny. It's obvious as to why this is terrible game design. It basically just inflates the amount of time you take between attempts, which is a very basic sin for difficult games. The more time that elapses between a player failing and the player getting to play the game properly again, the more frustrated a player becomes because they feel as though their time is being wasted. Now, I didn't expect Yoko Taro to actually get that many developers with this little trap, but after doing some research, it turns out a lot more game reviewers play games on hard mode than I thought they did. So you know what, props to Yoko Taro for, catching everyone, I guess. I haven't heard any stories of anybody quitting the game over this moment yet, but I will keep my eyes out, because that would be hilarious. Maybe I should go check joysticks, right? Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering about that opening monologue, yes, I do have some feeling that a lot of that was written, because at the end of this moment, a lot of people probably wanted to kill Yoko Taro. Now, on our second attempt, we defeat the giant robot arm with the help of some kid in one of these robot suits. This is 9S, our new partner in crime, who acts as the supporting main character for the rest of this playthrough. He's going to be doing reconnaissance and support while we make our way through the rest of this facility. The two continue through this factory, and early on their relationship is established. 9S is our supporting main character, and 2B is our main character. 2B is not only the character we are playing as, but is a character that clearly has some growth to do. She's what I like to call a warm heart, cold skin. Someone who's very cold and overly independent on the outside, but once you get to know them, they start to become more friendly and likable, which is the obvious path of progression they follow. 9S, on the other hand, is a bit of an unprofessional, a little bit of a lazy kind of character who is generally very friendly and likable. He's pretty much just a big dork who plays against 2B's professional badass killer attitude very well. In fact, I'd say 9S is the character most people will get invested in, since 2B is only really likable when playing off of 9S. 2B also mentions this.
Actually get a partner. It's kind of fun.
Emotions are prohibited.
Sorry, man.
As much as I'd like to rant about this line, this is one of those things that we will have to get into later, because it's probably the stupidest thing in this game. Not the worst, mind you, just the stupidest. We work through the factory and learn a little bit about how apparently humanity isn't doing so well and that machines have taken over at the very least this entire factory. These machines being our enemies, and judging by all of the rust and the broken down and sunken buildings, it's safe to assume that we're playing some kind of a post-apocalyptic or dystopian game. Towards the end of the factory, we meet our first real boss of the game, a giant robot disguised as some kind of an oil rig or a building. His name is hidden from us on our first playthrough here, reaffirming that Yoko Taro likes to hide details about his bosses on your first playthrough. In fact, hiding details is something Taro likes to do quite a lot. As far as this boss fight goes, it's actually a pretty good first boss. The bits where you control 2B outside of a flight suit are pretty easy since this boss has some of the most slowly telegraphed attacks out of any enemy in the game. And the parts where you're in a flight suit aren't very much more challenging. If anything, they're actually easier. The coolest parts of this boss are the fact that the stages it morphs through are very unique to one another. At the start of the fight, you're not even taking down the same enemy as what you end up killing, and of course, the switch to a third-person shooter is as welcomed here as it was anywhere else throughout this entire introduction. The more important part of this boss is what goes on in the story. Once this boss gets into its true form, it starts to really put pressure on 2B, so 9S comes in to provide fire support. He starts off by just shooting at the Goliath, and a bit later he hacks into its missile attack and presumably kills it with it. But this is a trick, and in a final spurt of effort, the Goliath knocks 9S right out of his flight unit. Luckily, 9S lands on top of the Goliath and not into the ocean, so we can still run after him. We actually get to climb the enemy here, which is pretty cool. While we're running after 9S, the Goliath reactivates itself, not nearly as dead as we had thought, and very luckily for us, he doesn't just decide to, drown us by doing a squat. We get up to 9S and find him in very poor condition. I'm just gonna let this bit of this cutscene play out for you.
I have to help 9S. I have to repair him. Pod, get me staunching gel and logic virus vaccines. Then access the—
Inadvisable. The subject's vital signs are too poor to attempt field repair in
Shut up!
current...
Just do what I say!
2B. Just go.
You shut up too.
We're soldiers. We take pride in our service.
HO-229 Flight Unit. Command 677 received. Usage rights transferred from 9S to 2B. Requesting acknowledgement.
Please.
Yeah, that's a lot of concern coming from someone who berated this kid for having emotions, just saying. We take his flight unit and start finalizing this fight, and as it turns out, this machine has a very peculiar ability to form words, though it's all just kill on repeat, so it's fair to say that it's still a pretty mindless hunk of metal. We kill the robot in a spectacular cutscene and reunite with the currently dying 9S. Just before we can call for help, 3 more of these Goliaths appear, and our 2 friends have no choice but to deal with them using something called the black box reaction, a gigantic explosion created when 2 of these things of theirs come into contact. These black boxes are assumably very important since they're how we detected that 9S was still alive, and that real-life black boxes, like on planes, are one of the more important parts of the actual plane you can find in the wreckage. Assuming it crashes, that is. The explosion from the resulting reaction takes out a sizable part of this ocean, and more importantly kills 2B and 9S in addition to their 3 Goliath friends. We then wake up once again in space, with the objective of rebooting ourselves. It was pretty obvious from the time that 9S was hurt that these 2 are androids, not cyborgs mind you, androids, as in robots designed to look and function like human beings. Our consciousness were backed up onto some kind of a central server before our mission, and the activation of the black box meant that we've had to reboot ourselves, since these 2 lost their bodies in the explosion. Now, it is at this time that I want to clarify that 2B remembers what happened at the time of her death, meaning that we in some way can stream our lives onto whatever server or hard drive we rebooted from. Essentially, we're playing as the same exact 2B and 9S, since they both remember what happened and aren't just a copy of the same person. Basically, this is to say that this isn't like Soma, if you've ever played or watched anything about that game, where people copied their consciousness onto a new body. This is Nier Automata, and in Nier Automata, we transfer ourselves onto a new body, at least up until our last backup. This is why 2B remembers 9S sending her data back to home base, but 9S doesn't, because he didn't have time to send his own data. Now, the rules of exactly how this works are a topic for later, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to clarify this for now. After we establish that we are not dead, we get some exposition as to what exactly the backstory of the game is. What happened that caused all this post-apocalyptia was that at some point a very long time ago, aliens visited Earth and unleashed the machines on the planet in an effort to destroy humanity. Most people died, but a small few people survived and managed to flee to the moon and have been conducting counterattacks ever since with the help of us, their android army known as Yorha. And this war between Yorha and the machines has apparently been on a grinding halt for the last few forever, but spirits are still high that with the help of advanced Yorha units like 9S and 2B, we can win this. After all of these cutscenes, we go into some kind of a black screen where 9S talks to us in text. This is our rebooting that's going on here. In a very fourth wall breaking fashion, our rebooting actually happens in our game systems. We even have to set our own brightness back up so that we can see what's going on, and turn up the audio so that we can hear 9S again. See, this is what I was expecting when I was told Yoko Taro was a little bit weird. Little did I know, right? We're told that this entire process is being recorded for posterity, and we have a little dialogue with 9S before we pack it up. We wake up once again to even more cutscenes, and afterwards 9S and 2B once again partner up permanently. We also pass by an access point, which is basically just a save point. It should be noted that for a game that started off with a very interesting pitch on how it handles save games, this game has some of the most vanilla saving ever. You find a save point, you save at that save point, and bada bing, you're done. It's still clever that this is tied into backing up your data, however. In fact, the whole user interface plays on the fact that we are robots, which is pretty much the thing you have to do when your main character is a robot. So it's nice to see the obvious trick once again get to show itself off. Once we're all done here, we get our first mission. We need to rendezvous with a third faction, known as the Resistance, who operates on the Earth's surface and deploy down there using flight suits. Now, while we go to the surface, there's only really one interesting plot development that happens, and that's that when we finally get onto the planet, we meet some machine lifeforms who are not hostile, they're passive. They don't hurt anything, which gets you on the path of predicting that maybe Nier is going to pull some kind of a switch on us where we end up being monsters for killing things that can think and breathe and feel. Starting by having the machines just not be monsters, but you probably already know that. It takes us a bit to get to the Resistance camp, and in fact I'm going to intentionally prolong the footage here because I wanted to talk about myself for a moment because I'm a narcissistic cunt. If you want to just skip back over to talking about the game, go here. So, a lot of you who have already played Nier might be asking yourself why I'm reciting the plot to A, beat for beat, if I intended to make this video for an audience that's already played it. Well, the answer is that I just write like this. You'd be surprised how often people either forget things about a game or just watch videos because they've never played it, and this is also a sort of a note-taking that helps me understand everything I play. It keeps everyone on an even playing field, and it's also just good for gathering examples, because you can maybe talk about a boss at one point in the video and then reference that boss later on, and everyone will know what you're talking about, even if they might have forgotten it before or have never played the game. Also, it should be noted that A and C are the only playthroughs that facilitate this kind of writing. B, D, and E will take very little time in comparison. This video is basically a camel, or maybe a well-stacked chest. We only have 2 big summits to climb, but not much more. Now, that's enough about me, but one last thing before we progress, I want to parade the fact that I absolutely love the city ruins in Nier Automata. I am very much a fan of vegetative post-apocalypses. And I have to say that the city ruins were a fantastically welcome sight on my first playthrough. One thing I noticed, however, was that there was an awful lot of reused assets and a general lack of detail to what is supposed to be the ruins of a city. Now, in-game, it's been 7,000 years since the world ended, so I have no idea how any of these buildings or cars are even still around, but that's irrelevant. The game just looks very barren, and there's actually a reason as to why this is, and it's frame rate. Platinum Games is known for sacrificing flashy next-gen visuals and cluttered environments for a stable 60 FPS on consoles because they feel like their action games should play as smoothly as possible with the fastest possible reaction times. This is the best possible choice they could have made. There is no world in which a bunch of dented-up street signs and more car models would have improved Automata as much as what should be our industry-standard frame rate has. I lament the fact that the game doesn't look better because, like anyone else in the 21st century, I play on a PC, but I'm glad that the game runs smoothly on the PS4. No one's gameplay should be sacrificed for graphics that will become outdated in a few years. And another thing I'd like to commend Platinum for is the fact that, apparently, Automata has fully rebindable controls on consoles, which is a fantastic leap forward for the platform. We get to the Resistance camp and meet with their leader. She calls us Number 2, apparently remembering to be maybe, but she seems a little nervous about it. Maybe she's mistaken us for someone else. She tasks us with talking to some of her people to gain information about the situation of the mission area, but in reality we find that these guys are just utility NPCs. 2 shops, and one of them is an options menu type thing. These guys just give us some side quests. Now, while Nier Automata doesn't really have a static type of game, as we've already seen, don't let the mention of side quests, or the fact that there's a level up bar in the corner, get you thinking that this is an RPG. I have very strongly rooted opinions on what makes an RPG, and let me say that Nier is not one, because there's not really any role-playing. Which, by the way, is not a bad thing. Something is not bad just because it isn't an RPG. Now, these quests are fairly mundane. All we need to do is skip around and grab some stuff for each of these 2 shops and return once we've collected them. Doing this opens up a weapons shop and the general shop's ability to sell plug-in chips, which are character upgrades. The third person didn't actually have any kind of quest, she just wanted someone to talk to. All these quests also have a neat little story to them, but we don't have nearly the best ones yet. While exploring around, we also have our first regularly scheduled contact with Operator 6-0. 6-0 is another recurring supporting character of ours, and once again she's actually likable because she's happy-go-lucky and yearns to see Earth once again. The setup for a future, more warm 2B is uncanny now. We return to Anemone, the leader of the Resistance, and she gives us another job to investigate some machine sightings in the nearby desert, so we head out there. During our travels, we meet up with a forward resistance camp and get a message from HQ about how hundreds of thousands of human survivors on the moon are looking forward to our success on the ground, which gives us a little more hope about what we're fighting for. We meet up with a resistance fighter named Jackass, who's a bit of a smartass and a bit of a badass all wrapped into one, who gracefully opens a hole into the desert for us, and gives us our real objective, which is to go and kill all of the machines in the desert. You don't actually have to do that, by the way. In fact, there's only one robot you have to kill, but I'm going to kill all of them to take the opportunity here to ramble some more. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that it's weird for 2B to even be on this mission. This was originally a reconnaissance job, and 2B is a combat android, not a scanner like 9S. But as she says in the game, orders are orders. And the second thing I wanted to quickly talk about is a certain distinction that helps us a lot with the plot here. These resistance fighters, these guys, these are androids as well. I originally thought that these were human or cyborg fighters that were deployed to Earth, and that never got to the moon. So they're fighting for the same thing that we're fighting for. Now, the more important thing I want to talk about here is the fact that we've cycled over through two entirely different new areas without any kind of a loading screen. Nier Automata is touted as an open-world game, and while it is open-world in the sense that you can move throughout it without any kind of loading screens whatsoever, it's weird to call it necessarily an open-world game. It's more like an open-level game. There's different areas that you can explore that all have their own theme and are very open to exploration themselves, but the world itself isn't like a giant flat space of explorable stuff. It's more so that the game has all of these open-ended levels and lets you bounce between them however you like. Imagine that there's like 10 medium-sized spaces all stitched together with transitional paths and tunnels instead of one gigantic space. The reason I think that this is interesting is that it mirrors a recent trend amongst the biggest of Japan's games to be open-world titles. This is no doubt following the also very recent trend of single-player Western games that are all open-world titles. This whole thing started around maybe 2012 or 2013, and I think we've been seeing a little bit less of it now, but I think it's rather strange that Japan seems to have taken up the mantle just a bit after its mass popularity. I mean, we have games like Metal Gear Solid 5, this, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, here the new Final Fantasy had a lot of car driving, hell, I think even the new Mario game is open world. Now, I can't speak for any of the Nintendo titles on this list, or Final Fantasy, but I found Metal Gear Solid 5 to be an enjoyable game, but one that didn't really make a good case for open world. MGS5's open world was a lot of blank and empty space in between oases of content, but Nier isn't like that. Nier has a lot of little distractions to keep you from thinking about how you're just running around, but also doesn't have massive swaths of nothing to distract you from. And more importantly, the movement is fantastic. Jumping from building to building, or sliding down sand dunes, or jumping around on theme park cars is all really, excuse my buzzwords, fluid. It just clicks naturally, and it's because of how many different kinds of movement there are. You have your dash, sprint, jog, jump, double jump, air dashing, and hovering. You'll probably spend most of your time jumping, sprinting, air dashing, and hovering though. And this all feels very nice. The level design took them into consideration very well. There's a lot of times where two platforms will be just far enough to hover between and still safely grapple onto. It's very satisfying. There's also stuff to explore and find, some of which is hidden for later playthroughs, and most of it is just items and quests, which honestly are the best parts of exploration. But there are also these things that I like to call gadgets, which are just these little interactable items that have real significance to the story that you can find if you look around enough. Quests are the most common, but there are various trinkets and baubles hidden around, like I said, gadgets, that will tell you about certain characters or tell you stories that just exist in the world. And some of these stories also have a kind of silent significance to the people who have played previous Nier games. The world building in Nier is actually fantastic, but I just don't have time to properly go into that yet. So after we slide around in the sands for a while, we find a strangely sapient robot who actually has the audacity to run away from us when we try to kill him, and leads us to another part of the desert where an old city is buried in sand. Following our new friend, we start to meet some more machines who can actually articulate certain very basic thoughts, even feelings at times. Once again shoving us in the direction of some kind of a moral quandary debating whether or not these robots are people and if it was okay to kill them. Right? We follow our new target through an android graveyard, and then into this, which I will allow to explain for itself.
Child. Child. Child.
What is this?
Don't listen to them, 2B.
Together forever. Together forever. Carry me. Carry.
They don't have any feelings. They're just imitating humans.
After a while, these guys here get mad at us, and once again, I'll let you see it.
This cannot continue.
What's happening?
An android?
No! This is a machine!
Yeah, that's fucking weird. Anyway, this new dickless baby machine thing is our newest boss. Over the course of this fight, this machine showcases the most advanced dialogue any of their species has been capable of thus far, stringing together even basic sentences, and over the course of the battle, he evolves. He gains levels, new attacks, and even new tactics. We fight him for a while until we get the upper hand, and 9S and 2B take the opportunity to perform a sick double stab through pretty much all of his important bits. Another version of himself sprouts full form from the first one's chest and starts to literally bring the house down, forcing our retreat. Once we're safe, we upload our combat data of this exchange to HQ, also known as the bunker, and by the way, trust me, that is a very important part of the plot. Write down combat data somewhere. And then we return to the resistance camp for a resupply and a nap. Once we're done napping, we rush back out and get a surprise transmission from the commander of Yorha. Apparently, several androids who are making their way to Earth lost contact with the bunker, but still have their black boxes transmitting data, so we're told to go and find our missing-in-action comrades. We head out to the amusement park, which has all kinds of happy-go-lucky, if slightly unsettling machines having a merry festival while spouting lots of repeated lines about fun and joy and all these other nice things. You can just smell the humanization. Not much else really happens here, but I will mention that I think that the amusement park is the most visually appealing place in the game. I also want to make sure that Yoko Taro and his writers know that I very much appreciate that the subtitles do that thing where you capitalize certain letters, but not other ones. I fucking love doing that. We find ourselves onto a neat little roller coaster ride where we have this adorable little interaction.
Hey, 2B?
Yes?
People who know me well usually call me Nines, so... So what do you think? I mean, if you want to call me Nines, it's totally okay.
I'm good.
Oh, alright.
And dive straight into our next boss battle. Now this is my favorite boss in the game. The game's bosses are a bit of a hit or a miss, and we'll talk about that much later in Chapter C, but for now, this one's my favorite. We're gonna have to fight this lady in the background, so here's a little story time for you to pass the time. I originally started playing Nier Automata on hard mode, like I said, and this boss pretty much whooped my ass constantly, even if I was having a blast losing over and over again. She highlights, for me at least, the moments where the division between the various difficulty modes in Nier are at their most apparent. Because I think that this boss is fairly challenging on hard mode, at least the first time around, but is pretty much a pissant on normal mode. The reason for this is that this is one of the only bosses, if not the only boss, who lets you restore your own health. She has additional enemies who will drop health kits on a chance once killed. She also has checkpoints on her various stages like the other bosses, which will set her health to a certain level once you reach them. But none of that is really the big issue. The issue I have with Nier's difficulty modes is that they're kind of boring. The game has 4 difficulty modes: easy mode, also known as I need to get this review out as fast as I fucking can mode, normal mode for people who aren't too big into action games, hard mode for people who like a real challenge in their action games, and very hard, in which you die in one hit no matter what. Now, truthfully enough, there are certain mechanics that are changed on bosses between modes, but they're little things. Like, for example, this very boss here has an attack where she activates a spinning blade near her feet and runs around the arena. On hard, this blade is active throughout the entire attack, and on normal, it sometimes takes a little bit of a break. And there are a few other examples of similarly small but noteworthy changes on a few other bosses. And mind you, I do appreciate the fact that these exist in the first place. But aside from these, the major difference from normal to hard is that on hard, almost everything will kill you in a hit, and certainly everything will in at most 3, and that's like the weakest attacks. But on normal, you're probably not ever going to die at all outside of a very few instances. And there's no change in the core mechanics between these modes. Dodging is the same between all of them, and the bullet patterns are also, from what I can tell, exactly the same. I can't tell for sure, I'm not an insider at Platinum after all, but it seems to me that the biggest culprit behind the massive shift in how much damage you take is because of the fact that healing in Nier Automata is far too easy. In this game, if you have a healing item and you want to use it, all you have to do is scroll down, press E on it, and bada bing, you're done. There's no animation that has to play out that puts you in danger, there's no limiting factor aside from the fact that you take your eyes off the boss or enemy to use the menu for a second if you want to switch which item you use. There isn't even a timer on how many you can use at once. You can spam healing items as fast as your poor fingers will go if you really feel the need for it. And the reason that this has to do with those damage numbers is the fact that on one difficulty setting you have a lot more chances to survive a hit and use a healing item, but in the other you have almost no chance at all. If you had an equal chance to use a healing item with the current system, then both difficulties would be a lot easier, or more so hard mode would be a lot easier because you could erase damage very easily. And it's the fault of the healing. It's just silly that you can heal like this without having to be in some kind of a relative safety to use the menu. I know Yoko Taro doesn't really care about this kind of stuff, and yeah, for anyone who hasn't started their beginner course in Taroism, that does sound weird, I know. But it's still easy to see how flawed this is. This is probably something more for Platinum. Maybe they care, but even if only I care, I think that Automata makes a very good case for the existence of customizable difficulty. Now, there is some level of this already in the game. For example, you can choose to never use upgrades, or to never upgrade how many of them you can carry into the game, or to turn off your partner's AI so that they don't even participate in a fight, which are very good and organic options. But I think that, at least personally, I would have loved if I could tweak the numbers a bit. I found A and B and most of C on normal to be pretty easy overall, and I would have liked the ability to maybe increase the damage by, I don't know, 20-25% maybe? I could have gone up to hard, but I found that hard mode rocked my socks a little too much. Eventually all the dying made me feel like I was just losing time and progress on this video. And personally, I think I would have enjoyed a compromise, but most games don't really allow for that. In fact, I can't really think off the top of my head of many games that have scaling, or more so scalable difficulty. There's Oblivion, the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, that is, but that's about all I can really think of. I think that in reality, the healing is what really needs fixing, even if just by giving a little animation where the player injects or eats the healing item, or however we use this, for all I know it's a lotion. This is the first boss that also introduces hacking, and hopefully you don't get too bored of that. Killing this boss grants us some kind of a quick flash of two machines standing near each other, a foreshadowing of our future playthrough where Yoko Taro makes everything sad. And once we walk back outside, the prophecy is fulfilled. We find a passive, thinking, talking, friendly machine who wants us to go back with him to his village, which is a village of happy, passive, talking, friendly machines. We also get to see the Resistance send up supply rockets to the people on the moon. We talk a little bit about the aliens and meet with the leader of the village, a robot named Pascal. Now this village here is a pretty big hub for quests, and I thought it'd be an interesting time to talk about that. Gameplay-wise, these quests are kind of all over the place. A lot of quests are just generic fetching or killing or even escorting quests, but some others really stand out. There's an oddball machine who wants to have a foot race with you, a quest where Jackass will give you some time trials, and I even remember playing a block puzzle at one point. But the real draw of these quests is the stories. Nier Automata has a lot of neat little stories. Most of the main plot is what I call the plot, and a lot of what happens in Ending B is what I would call the world building, but all these little stories make up what I think is the story of Nier. Automata is a game where if you just play through the main story, you're going to be just fine. But if you dig into weapon description stories and reading terminals and novels and doing all these quests, you get the real picture, the full game. None of it is really required to understand the plot. It's all fluff, really, but the fluff is really good. It's not deep individually, at least not most of the time, but it's very fun to learn. You get a sense of what people are going through, what machines and androids think about, what's going on beyond just the biggest events of the world. It's all good, if sometimes a bit predictable considering how often the punchline is someone died. Very much of this game's story is held off to the explorers, especially those gadgets you can find around the world. But this is all best done by veterans though, because a lot of this stuff has significance to old Nier players. Nier Automata doesn't really even have an incredibly direct connection to Nier Replicant/Gestalt, or Gestalticant, at least not for the purposes of understanding and enjoying Automata on its own. But if you played those games, there are some incredibly charming things to find. It might be hard to tell, but I'm actually having a hard time describing this. It's weird. Like many other games have had things like side quests and weapon descriptions, references and all, but for Nier it just feels different. It feels like a very integral part of the game to go out and search for all these little tales in the vast world of Nier, but you don't need to do any of it to get the plot. It's not like other games where all the world building is just information about politics and groups and events in the universe. Most of these quests and weapons have nothing of the sort, they're just neat tiny little stories that you can listen to. But without all these tiny stories, the game's overall story feels incomplete. And this is nothing to say, of course, about the vast array of novellas and fucking, I kid you not, screenplays written about these games. If I had to describe it shortly, if you play the game without all this side content and you don't pay attention to it, you'll be fine. You'll very much enjoy and understand the plot of Nier, but if you take the time to talk to people, you'll learn the story of Nier. That probably doesn't make very much sense, but it's the best I have. If you've ever played the game, you probably know what I'm talking about. Maybe. So, after doing however many quests that you want, we get a mission from Pascal to bring a fuel filter, which Anemone needs, back to her at the Resistance camp, so we go and do that. These robots here, and their leader, are some pretty nice people, staunch pacifists, so it's now solidified in my mind that there's gonna be some kind of an ethical quandary about murder in this game, right? On our way, we get another cute little regularly scheduled contact with 6-0.
Operator 6-0 to 2B? Time for your regularly scheduled contact.
2B here. What's wrong?
Oh. There's this operator I kind of liked, but when I asked her out, she turned me down. Honestly, 2B, I don't know how I'm supposed to go on living.
I am definitely not the person to discuss this with.
I don't think I can stand spending one more day in this bunker.
You leaving would be bad for me. It would affect mission efficiency.
Are you saying you need me, 2B?
All Model B combat units require the assistance of an operator. So,
2B?
that's all. Closing this channel.
Adorable sure is a lot of not emotion from 2B, right? We bring this fuel filter to Anemone, and we get something to fetch back to Pascal, and Pascal finds a way to communicate with us directly just to exchange some pleasantries. Once we get back to Pascal, he says that we should get to know all of the people of the village, but we already had a decent look around, so instead we're just gonna go back to base. The moment we get a move on, we hear some distant explosions or collisions, and get a warning that another Goliath-class machine has touched down in the ruins. Now, I was expecting Goliath-class machine to mean some kind of a new and interesting boss, but it's actually just two of the first thing again. Yeah, Nier Automata has a little bit of an itch for reusing bosses. There's these two here, two more bosses in this ending, though they do have slightly different mechanics, and a mini-boss later, which is a copy of a boss from this ending. It's never too bad, and there's generally enough variety to keep you going throughout the game without groaning about how you've already fought something, but it's still kinda disappointing to do a fight you've already done, just naturally. Bosses are supposed to be these amazing climaxes of the story and the combat, and to see that these peaks in excitement are wasted on old hats is kinda boring. Unless you have some kind of a reason, like you didn't kill the boss the last time and this is round 2 or whatever. There's nothing really interesting about this boss until it's dead, so we're gonna hit the brakes again while this plays out. So let's talk about Nier Automata's PC port. First off, let me say that the actual game, outside of some control issues, is perfectly playable and functional. I never had any dips below 60+ in the entire game outside of the cutscenes, which were pre-recorded at 30 FPS. But the actual game is fine. The options menu is decent enough, but the thing that you should note about what I'm saying is that my copy of Nier Automata is fine. Nier has apparently had some pretty rough problems, especially near launch, where people were getting widely different qualities of ports even if they had the same PC hardware. It was basically luck determining if you got an issue-free release or not. Even my PC copy has issues. I can't go into full screen, only windowed, which is probably the biggest one. I never encountered any bugs outside of some weirdness with AI pathing, which is pretty fantastic. But this game is another clear example of the growing pains Japanese games have been having with PC ports. Japanese PC ports are generally not what we would call the best. They have been getting much better as time has gone on, but there's still room for improvement. The reason that this is, well, reality, is because Japan doesn't really care about the PC market, or didn't. Because the PC market in Japan is still rather niche in comparison to people who play on PS4s and to a lesser extent Xboxes, and that Japanese game devs generally care more about their domestic market than their foreign ones. Slowly, this is going to change. I mean, it just has to. The East can't keep its games from the West forever, and the West can't even pretend to be disinterested in the East's games anymore. So eventually, growth will happen, if only because of the fact that there's money to be made across the Pacific. In fact, a few weeks after this script's writing, and this is kind of an errata here, Platinum Games themselves even stated that they'd be bringing a whole bunch of their games over to PC, starting with the recent Bayonetta port, which I hear is just great. And as far as this overall process is concerned, I imagine Nier is actually going to play a part in that as well. This game was wildly successful for Yoko Taro, and a big hit for Square Enix and Platinum, showing that once again there is a market for their games in the PC that is significant enough to pay more attention to. I imagine Platinum already kinda knew that PC gamers enjoyed their stuff. Metal Gear Rising was pretty successful over here and had a lot of critical acclaim, and I'm glad to see that more games are coming over to my platform from a place that has generally not seemed to care much for it. Now, that one thing about Nier's port that was bad, the mouse control on any bullet hell segments is so bad. So bad. You can probably see how the mouse is constantly spasming left and right even if I hold it still, and that's because the dead zone on the mouse is absolutely minuscule. Imagine, if you will, that there is like a circular rail that your mouse can glide along. Moving your mouse in a circular motion along this rail will determine in which direction you aim during these parts of the game, kind of like a joystick. But the circle is fucking tiny, and there is not a rail, so even the smallest, tiniest budge will cause it to flail out of direction. It makes aiming a complete and sometimes impossible chore and ruins any and all hacking in the game. This is only really applicable to the twin-stick shooting bits. However, when the mouse is locked, everything is fine, but the moment two axes of movement are involved, everything just goes hog wild. So, after these two Goliaths die, they let out some kind of an energy burst, also known as an explosion, which shakes and sunders the entire landscape beneath us. Then, of all things, we finally get signals from the aliens that made the machines, after 7,000 years. Apparently, these little shits have been hiding underground. The commander of Yorha tells everyone to go and investigate, and naturally we're the people closest to Ground Zero, because, Ground Zero is kind of our fault. So we travel through some really weird machine tunnels until we find some kind of advanced alien vault, and I'll let you watch this bit.
Are they dead?
2B, look!
Destroyed alien motherships.
Welcome to the graveyard of our creators.
Ah, crap, these assholes are back. So basically, these guys are gonna exposition at us for a while. Here's the skinny. These guys are the leaders of the machines. They killed the aliens who created them. They explain that all machines exist on a network which houses each and every machine's personality. Basically, all the machines are connected just like Yorha, and that this network can evolve just like they did. These two guys, named Adam and Eve, say that they want to find the humans on the moon to study us, because we make little logical sense in the grand scheme of things, and then 9S unironically says bonkers.
Leave this 2B? This guy's bonkers. Well,
Gonna have to hit him on the head for that one. And, well, after we hold our own for long enough, they take their leave. By the way, the two leaders of a new species being named Adam and Eve, very original. We leave ourselves, and we hear that we can finally use transporters, which allow us to move our consciousness to and from the bunker and to any save points that we have. Basically, it's just a fast travel. We see Jackass again too, and she tells us what we already know. We return to the bunker, talk with the commander about what we found, and get sent back to Earth to get more information about that weirdo Pascal. We interrogate Pascal about his pacifism, the aliens, and about the other machines. Pascal says that he doesn't like fighting anymore because the machines have been doing it for hundreds of years, and that it scared him that he got used to seeing his friends die in droves left and right of him, mixed with the fact that the aliens had strangely not been sending any messages for however long, kinda made him lose sight of what he was truly supposed to be doing all this for. It's also revealed here that this village has cut itself off from the machine network, as has a local hostile nation of machines trying to etch out a living in the nearby forests. It's our job to research this stuff, so we head out to this forest kingdom in search of more answers, which is made much easier with the help of fast travel. One quick note while we're on our way to the kingdom, this game's music is fucking amazing. I'm not a musicologist, so I can't tell you why, but it's just great. Don't listen to the OST yet, however, if you haven't played the game, because a bunch of the names are spoilers. It's all weird, but I love it. Pascal's village is my favorite theme. On our way to the forest, we go through an old shopping mall and have another cute conversation with 9S about how he would take 2B shopping if they had been human. And then we meet this thing.
Huh? Hey, where am I?
what's that?
Hey there, guys. What's up?
This thing's weird, 2B. Let's kill it.
Wait, what? No!
Good idea.
No!
Okay, what was that?
This is Emil, or at least it's his head. So, right, Nier Automata is a Nier game. However, unfortunately, I am not a Nier player, except for this game. I'm still a noob. Wish I wasn't, but I am, and I don't really have any money to buy a copy of Nier 1, so I'm gonna just be lazy and play this one. Now, if I were a Nier fan, I'd probably start this part of the discussion by telling you all of the little individual examples of how Nier Automata connects to Nier 1, but I'm actually glad I'm not, because I think I'd be missing the point. I think it's more important to talk about the philosophy behind Nier Automata's inclusion of Nier references rather than just jotting down all the ones I find. Basically, Automata uses references from other Nier games to improve itself for the people who know about them. If you don't know about Nier 1, you're not really going to miss anything in Automata, but according to my Nier playing friends, these references make the game infinitely more beautiful if you know about them. One of them even said they were driven to tears by just a simple flower. Nier isn't directly connected, at least not in a way that's easy to follow without looking at Wikipedias and novellas, like I said, but I think that these references are done exceptionally well. The distance these games have, along with their, at the same time, deep-rooted connections, allow us to look at Nier Automata not in relation to the rest of the Nier franchise, but rather to look at how it uses its own history in relation to itself to make itself a better game. It's kind of the Fallout 1 philosophy of references. If you include a reference, you have to make it so that people who don't know the reference don't even know that they're missing a reference, but the people who do will totally get it, even if Automata is maybe a tiny bit less subtle about it. We press on into the Forest Kingdom, and we're met with an entire legion of machines ready to toss their lives aside to protect their Forest King, who probably lives out in that castle over yonder. We make our way into the castle, and we get another cute little interaction between 9S and 2B.
Watch out for hostile enemies, 2B.
Roger that, 9...
Huh? Wait, what did you just say?
Roger that, 9S.
Wait, no, that's not what you said. You said 9s. Or at least something close to...
Cut the chatter and engage the enemy.
Ah.
Oh, I love these two. Okay, so we find the Forest King and... oh, he's a little kid. Well, that's kind of weird. How do these machines even have a kid? Okay. Everybody meet A2. She's going to be very important later on, but not so much for right now. It should, however, be noted that this is basically the moment that divided the new Nier community into two camps. The people who like A2 the most, and the people who like 2B the most. And I'll let you all bicker about it in the comments section. We fight off A2 for a while, and once we hurt the poor girl enough, she says this.
Why? Why did you betray us?
Command is the one that betrayed you.
Ooh, cryptic. She runs away, we try to chase her, she gets away, and 9S gets the idea to go to Pascal and ask around there about A2. Pascal has heard of A2, but doesn't know for sure any real details, so we just head back to the Resistance camp. Just in time for our next regularly scheduled heartbreak.
Operator 60 to 2B. It is time for your regularly scheduled contact.
This is 2B. Nothing to report.
Listen, 2B. I was looking at images of flowers today and...
Flowers?
Yeah. There wasn't much left in the bunker's records, but I found one called a lunar tear. I bet you'd look really nice if you put one of those in your hair, 2B. It'd suit your stylish looks.
Don't need it.
Aw, don't be a stick in the mud. What kind of girl doesn't want to look good sometimes? I'll let you know if I find anything else cute, okay?
I don't need to hear about...
Operator 60 out.
Hurts, don't it? We return to the Resistance camp, and we're told by Anemone that she wants our help in protecting some missiles the Resistance is trying to get onto an aircraft carrier. But she does mention that if there's some more important Yorha business we need to take care of, then we can do that beforehand, and that it's no big deal. This little sentence here actually means a lot to me. I play a lot of open-world games with a lot of side quests, and very often do I find it hard to rationalize doing the optional content in a story where the main quest is infinitely more important. Nier Automata gives you plenty of opportunities for downtime, times where you could totally justify 2B and 9S going off to do something else because the main story isn't so incredibly urgent that it demands their immediate attention. And in fact, most of the times where it does demand your attention, you don't even have a chance to go out and do side quests because you're doing the important thing. It has a really good pacing. I never felt like I was clashing with either the story or the gameplay to do either side content or the main quest. We've done plenty of quests by now, though I do recommend you take every opportunity to complete as many quests as possible. Hell, take the time to find all of the references and archives and stuff too. The side content is fantastic. Some of these side quests even lead to new endings. In fact, that's another good point to quickly mention about Nier. It obviously has a very interesting idea of what endings are. The most interesting thing about Nier's endings will come once we're done with this chapter, but the fact that the game has 21 joke endings is, well, it's impressive for whatever reason you really want it to be. Helping out the Resistance leads us to yet another new area, where we fight off a few machines trying to make their way to our missiles. Once we clean up here, the commander tells us that the carrier vessel we're supposed to get these missiles to has come under fire from the machines and that we need to hop in some flight units and provide backup. The enemy deploys a Goliath flyer at us, and we kill it no sweat, saving the boat from this last boss and all of his forces, securing a safe spot for these missiles. Oh, fuck. Okay, so there's the real boss. The giant fucking fish. Now, as cinematically cool as this boss is, he's honestly crap. It's an entire boss based around the gameplay you get while you're in the flight units. No action combat whatsoever, and I imagine that he would have been a really neat boss if it weren't for one thing. The sword on the flight unit. The flight units have two kinds of attack outside of shooting. Light attacks and heavy attacks. You can ignore the existence of heavy attacks, because light attacks are all you'll ever need. They're insane. You swing your sword 360 degrees around you, destroying any bullets that are nearby, and you can swing this thing all over the fucking place. Basically, it removes pretty much any chance you'll have of being hit by anything unless you really try to run up and eat bullets. And it makes this boss a total weakling for something that should have been probably much more tense considering its size. I mean, you have this giant fucking super machine, and the thing barely puts up a fight even though it can eat aircraft carriers. I mean, seriously, this thing fights like a little kid. The only and most interesting thing about this guy is how the fish boss will interact with the fight going on in the foreground. He'll flail his arms at you and shoot lasers from his position, which can hit you while you fight off the real enemies, and that's it. Towards the latter end of this fight, 9S suggests that we use nearby coastal mortars to kill the fish, and oh yeah, give me that thing. Sweet. So, the mortar plan goes as swimmingly as you could hope for from a gun the size of a townhouse and, oh. Crap. The fish knocks us off of our platform just in time for Pascal and friends to Deus Ex Machina us to safety. Pascal explains to us that this thing here is some kind of a berserk machine that kills anything in sight, even other machines, which makes me wonder why they're now helping it, but whatever. And 9S asks us to stay behind and keep this thing where it is, cause he has a plan. That plan being to bomb the fish with those giant missiles back on the shore. We destroy all of this thing's shields and EMP generators so that the targeting doesn't mess up and send the big bastard back where it came from. The resulting explosion causes a massive shockwave that sends everything in the nearby area flying outward in all directions. We luckily wake up on shore, but 9S is nowhere to be found. We'd been asleep for 8 hours, but the EMP blast from the explosion has knocked out almost all of our network functionality all over the place. But apparently Command is picking up 9X's black box signal just faintly enough to prove that he's alive, so we begin our search. The search takes us to the Resistance camp to get some scanning equipment to locate 9S, given to us graciously by these weird twins here. Interesting group. At the start of our search, we get this neat little dialogue between 2B and her pod.
It's funny. You're oddly chatty today.
Affirmative. As a support unit, I am capable of engaging in conversation as necessary. Proposal. 2B should initiate conversation more frequently.
Proposal denied.
Yeah, as it turns out, these pods are characters too. Remember that. We use this new scanner, and we eventually find 9S's signal in some weird underground bunker. Which takes us to this place. I'll let this cutscene play out for itself.
Welcome to my beloved city.
Yeah, so he's back, and we have a long-winded conversation which is of some fair significance. Basically, Adam here is still trying to understand humans and says that the root of humanity is conflict, and also confirms that the machines exist on a network, but also claims that throughout the bloodlines of their species, none of them have ever had any true life, as he describes it. No concept of death. They all act like, well, machines, and this disappoints him. Adam also says that he has disconnected from the network, and we begin his boss fight. The start of this fight is pretty neat, but it doesn't come into its own until this.
Oh, I do enjoy this.
Nines!
I prepared this just for you. I mean, after all, we all need something to fight for, don't we?
You son of a... I'll kill you!
Yes! That's it. That's the feeling. Pure hate! Come to me!
Now, I'll talk about what just happened in a moment because it's the most important part of this game for me, but for now, we have Adam's boss fight. I hate to keep hitting the brakes on this video, or more specifically this chapter, but we've yet to talk about the proper action combat in Automata, and that's a shame. So let's start off with the elephant in the room. Platinum has not been making great games lately, or at least not platinum level games. The Legend of Korra, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in particular, and that Transformers game did not end up being the smash hit success games like MGR and Bayonetta that Platinum used to make. I can safely say that Automata is much better than any of those 3 games that I never played, but it's not perfect either. If I had to describe Nier's combat, I'd say that it's broken. Broken in the exact same way that MGR is, but at the same time it's better than MGR, almost strictly so, because of the intertwining of bullet hell mechanics into the action game. The dodging, the lack of any real combo meters or anything like that, and the controls, at least on PC, for Nier are all subpar. It's overall serviceable, and in fact very stylish thanks in heaps to this game's amazing animations. Like seriously, just look at this. Was that extra fabulous spin necessary? No, but it was cool, and was probably a lot more work than what needed to be done. And I'm really glad that it's in the game like this, cause once again it is cool. Nier Automata's combat is, from what I can tell, pretty standard for a spectacle fighter. It has its own unique spin on a similar basic foundation to MGR's. Now, that isn't to say that Nier Automata is a spin off of MGR, but rather that Nier and MGR both come from the same basic idea that they then added their own flavor to, like pretty much all of Platinum's games. You have light attacks, strong attacks, attacks that you perform by holding down either of these 2 buttons. You have various abilities tied to your pod that can act as a bit of combat utility, and you have your pod itself acting as a gun. You can also switch your equipped weapon sets mid-combat for some really cool juggling tricks. I'd say that overall, the best part of Nier's combat is how many different kinds of builds you can make for it. There's a ludicrous amount of different weapons, pods, pod abilities, and plug-in chip upgrades you can mix and match to stylize how you want to kill things. Plugins as an upgrade as well are also really cool since you can choose to sacrifice UI elements for more space to equip more of them, and you have to manage how many points you're using up to optimize your playstyle. It's really neat, and there's even I guess an Easter egg for unplugging your operating system, which will kill you. Aside from this, however, the combat is just very stylistic, almost, well, standard stuff with really below-average dodge mechanics. Aside from the whole genre-swapping nonsense, mind you, that's always cool. In Nier Automata, you can dodge enemy attacks. Doing so will make it so you go into a temporarily invincible state, and if you perform an attack during or just afterwards this state, you get a spectacular little move which inflicts a lot of damage to the enemy. The problem with this game, however, is that the dodging is so damn easy. The timer for what the game classifies as a successful dodge is far too lenient, and the game doesn't seem to be against allowing you to spam your dodge button over and over and still get a dodge. Remember how in MGR you could just keep hitting light attack and a directional key within multiple seconds of an incoming attack and still get the parry? It's a lot like that. The controls this time around are, however, worse. To dodge in Nier, you have to double tap a directional key, which will either just dash you away or perform the perfect dodge if you get the timing right. And I'm sorry, but double tapping a key is not a good control scheme for an action game. This is a genre where your ability to react to things quickly and respond to them in a timely fashion is incredibly important. But having to press a key twice inflates the amount of time that progresses between the player's brain realizing it's in danger and the game receiving the input that the player wants to dodge, because you have to tap the key twice. It's totally artificial, you're just hampered by this system, inarguably so. You're physically limited by the fact that the game wants 2 inputs rather than just 1. It's not a huge problem in this game outside of Simone on hard or very hard, but it's unnecessary. And this isn't even bringing up all the rest of the combat, like how there's no combo moves, or anything like that. The best combo in the game is starting off with light attacks and then progressing into heavy attacks if you have 2 fast weapons, so you can just juggle your enemy for a string of attacks that's long enough to kill them. Though I will commend how seamlessly all of the animations, even between different weapons, will transition into each other. There's plenty of variety in how you can kill stuff. You have lots of different moves, and again, there's an unhealthy amount of different builds you can make, but overall the combat is just very standard for Platinum. It doesn't have the charm of MGR's stupidly cool and spectacular boss fights, but isn't bad or disappointing. I'd say that it's mostly carried by the whole genre thing, which really is the most interesting part of actually playing Nier.
Is this death? So dark, so cold.
Nines! Nines.
2B.
Come on. Let's go home.
Either way, we kill Adam and get 9S back. Now, I actually have a story to cap out this part of the game, one that is very near and dear to me, but personally isn't really objective in any way. If you're sick of me hitting the brakes, then skip to the on-screen time and we'll get back to the actual provable game. So, it was at this point in Nier Automata where 9S was wounded and dying, and there was the chance in the back of my mind that he could potentially die here, where I got really invested in Nier. In fact, I got immersed. Now, this doesn't mean anything to many of you, but it means a lot to me because it just doesn't happen often anymore. When you do this whole game analysis thing, even if poorly, you kind of lose the ability to just play and enjoy games the way you used to. You start to examine them rather than to just sit back and play. You start to look through things through the lens of analysis all of the time, and it's incredibly, sometimes impossibly, difficult to just turn yourself off, as it were, and get immersed once more in the game you're playing like you used to be able to. I can't speak for everyone, but I know for a fact I'm not the only person who faces this minor issue. It gives you a newfound respect for things like game design, design philosophy, and game writing, but it makes it so you can't really go back to enjoying a game without having to think about these things. Without having to put it under a microscope and examine all of the nuts and bolts of how it works. It's just something that goes on in the back of your head. You write notes for yourself even if you don't plan on making a video or even have any kind of a notepad nearby. It plagues your enjoyment of video games. It's kind of ironic even. You get into analyzing games because you love them so passionately and got drenched in the tales and adventures that make you love the games in the first place. And because of that, you lose the capacity to love them in that way in the process. Sometimes you can go back and feel young again, as I call it, and just turn yourself off, but it's not likely. But for me, in Nier, at least in chapters A and C, I actually did get really invested in them. I went back to that place where I didn't look at a text document filled with incoherent ramblings and plot details, and I sat almost out of my chair, silently screaming at the screen in my head about the things that were going on. This is gonna sound stupid as hell, I mean this whole fucking paragraph does, but I actually felt something for the characters and the events in the game. I was worried about 9S and angry at Adam, not worried about deadlines or angry at audio quality. I got immersed again for the first time in Well, a really long time, and that makes Automata a game that, no matter what, I could never say I hated truthfully. Every chapter after A could have been a buggy, dysfunctional catastrophe, but for these fleeting moments where the game got me to feel like I used to again, it's very special to me. It's something I won't forget for a long time. And based on what Yoko Taro has said that he considers is important in a game, I can safely say that he succeeded with me. Maybe it won't affect everyone this way, but if it can take someone like me and turn me into someone I'm not anymore, then it must be doing something right. I'm sorry to get all soapboxy on you guys, but I don't know, it's important to me. Because I guess I never know, how long it'll be before it happens again, that I get myself back in the gaming headspace. Could be my whole life. Could be the very next game I play. Who knows? Back to the game, however. After we defeat Adam, we save the wounded 9S in this beautiful little cutscene. We have 9S sent back up to the bunker, and all is well for the time being. We make contact with the bunker again, and it turns out that Adam was the manager for half of the machine network, like the entire network. Which means that we now have some actual progress in this stalemate war we've been fighting for the last 7,000 years. With this massive disruption to the network, we're unsure of exactly how the machines are going to react, so we take a trip to go and do some reconnaissance. We head out to Pascal and ask him about it, and he says that there's a whole new machine colony that broke off of the network hiding out in the old factory that we should probably check out. We actually meet Pascal at the entrance to the factory, and heading inside we find a cult. We walk into their main corridor, find their leader, and... oh my. After we survive this horde for a bit, an elevator mysteriously opens up and we take it downstairs, and then we see 9S. 9S hacked into one of these machines here, and he's gonna provide backup by hacking into a bunch of the factory's systems to try and help us escape. We run around the factory, seeing some machines die while having drunk the Kool-Aid, and other machines beg in fear for their lives, and we see a bunch of strangely locked boxes and doors. Weird. At the end of the factory, we come face to face with the final boss of the area, this big ball spider guy. At first, this spider has a shield that makes him immune to all damage, but 9S shuts down the power and turns that nonsense off, along with the lights. So we have to fight this guy in the dark, which is kind of cool. We knock this guy's lights out and go home sweet home. Then this happens.
Why? Why did you have to die? It's not fair! My only brother. Damn them! I'll kill them! I swear I'll kill them all!
Where did he get a table? Oh, whatever. Either way, the point is, Edgy McAnime Hair isn't very happy with us. On our return run to the Resistance camp, we get a transmission from Anemone that shows that something is clearly wrong and see that machines are deploying in much greater numbers than before. We get to the Resistance camp and, oh, that doesn't look good.
Get out of here, now!
Are they eating them?
How are they even doing that? They don't have mouths. Okay, so we clear out this camp of the zombie robots and regroup with Anemone. We talk for a bit before some kind of an impact or an explosion cuts us short, and we investigate to find the same guy. Told you this game reuses bosses. Now, it's not fair to say that this guy is the same machine, because the fight is very different, but the look is one-to-one, and some of his mechanics are Control-C, Control-V. After some heavy fighting, this Goliath zaps 2B, but 9S shows up to suicide bomb it with a flight unit before it can do any more damage. Oh, and 9S is back from the bunker. Yay! Speaking of back, here's Eve. Eve's pissed. So Eve here is our final boss, and frankly his fight is kinda crap on this chapter. It blossoms later on, sorta, but the actual fight sucks. The story here is more important. We beat up Eve once, he becomes a gigantic machine worm thing, flies out towards Pascal's village, the village comes under attack, we run to help, fight the worm, kill the worm, and learn that Eve is in fact going mad, and he's making all of the machines on the network go mad with him. So we go to put an end to him, the network, this madness, once and for all. We fight Eve, almost kill him, and the fucker starts healing, of all things. Eve starts to vampire the machine network for health, and 9S hacks into Eve to try and shut him down. We protect 9S for a while, and the kid actually succeeds, cutting Eve off of the network. Eve goes goddamn crazy and breaks our sword, marking the final stage of this fight, which is, again, crap. And after all of this fighting, we finally put him down, and I'll let you watch from here.
Finally. It's over. Nines!
I really screwed up. I must have been corrupted when Eve detached from the network.
No.
It's okay. I can always reload my backup data from the bunker.
But you'll lose you, the you that exists at this very moment.
Guess so, but we can't upload this corrupted data to the bunker. So...
9S.
Please, 2B. I want you to do this for me.
It always ends like this. There's still some alive. Goddamned machines! Is this a message? The data transmissions, they're resonating with each other.
a second, 2B.
Who are...
It looks like I left my personal data in the machine side of things. Next thing I knew, my sense of self was regenerated over the surrounding network. Having multiple selves fused together like this is a pretty valuable experience, so I wanted to record it. But I couldn't access any storage areas yet, so I just multiplexed it over the memories of some nearby enemies so that when I returned to my own body,
Ines. I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah.
What is it that separates machines from androids like us? The machines have gained emotions, consciousness. The final screams they summoned on the edge of death. They still echo within me.
I feel like I'm losing hope in my body and my soul.
Make a note of what 2B said about things always ending this way, by the way. That's a pretty big fucking important right there. Okay, so I have a lot of shit to say about this very moment, so get comfy, cause this cutscene sucks. Okay, first off, there's very little tension in a death scene where I can just get another nearly identical version of the person I'm losing sent back down to me after the first one dies. Second off, nice not emotions there, 2B. Third off, Yoko Taro probably didn't care much about this ending with good reasons, so we never even lost 9S at all. Now, before we get into my first big boy question of this video, let's first off note that this ending comes with a message to everyone playing the game that Nier is a game best experienced on multiple playthroughs. Above even Platinum Games' work, or really any other part of Nier, I think this single branch of letters is what is most responsible for Nier Automata's success over Nier Replicant/Gestalt. The first Nier game was met with a pretty underwhelming press release, and as I understand it, there were quite a number of big review sites that never took into consideration that they would unlock new content by playing through the game more than once. But this message, after the ending of A in Automata, has more or less fixed even the chance of that issue from existing, and that was a very good choice on the part of Platinum Games and Yoko Taro. And I imagine that someone from Square Enix probably had a hand in that as well. Now, for that big question I had. I hate this cutscene. Genuinely. Not because 9S dies, or because he comes back. I didn't even think for a second that this ending was sad. What I thought was how sad it wasn't. I have never, in my entire gaming career, seen a cutscene that makes for a better example of why cutscenes should not exist. This is a very opinionated issue, and one that I have a predetermined opinion about, so I'll just make my case. It is a woeful and complete misuse of our medium to tell these incredibly important plot details through a cutscene. Cutscenes in no way play into the strength of games as an art form, and in fact, they play into its weakness. Games are interactive. You can have a player do things in them, unlike any other major media that exists, and it's just stupid to tell these stories through something other than the gameplay. This is something that has been plaguing our industry, games, for a very long time, and I hate it. There is just so much untapped potential in using gameplay as a storytelling method that it's just irresponsible to not use it, and this moment right here proves it. Yoko Taro has stated in the past that, to him, gameplay and story are not the most important part of games. We'll crack open that can of worms much later, but for now know that the thing that Yoko Taro values more above these two things is how a game makes you feel at the end. It's a very artistic viewpoint on games, and one that I think is somewhat agreeable and disagreeable for different reasons. However, if Yoko Taro wants people to feel something in his games, and if any developer wants to have emotional, connecting, and truly moving moments in their games, and if we as players want to have these in our games, we need to do away with cutscenes. Especially at moments like 9S's death. We should not have been shown 2B choking 9S to death. We are playing 2B. We should have been choking 9S to death. There is a big difference in responsibility people feel between things we do and the things we see. If you saw on the news that some kid got mugged and shot by a gangster or a crackhead or whatever, you wouldn't feel very much of anything outside of maybe sympathy, empathy, and maybe a little bit of depression. Now imagine that you mugged and shot a child. That's a little bit fucking different, isn't it? And it's the same for games. Not in the sense that we are mugging children, but in the sense that we have in the palms of our hands a medium where we can insert people consuming the story into the story, having them actually act out and be a part of and feel responsible for and shape our stories, and we're not using it. Too many games treat gameplay and story like they're to be kept away from each other, separated behind a big invisible barrier, and they are not. Making the player responsible for something like 9S's death would be infinitely, unexplainably more depressing than just watching it happen outside of our control. You don't even have to tell your stories through the normal gameplay loop or anything. You can have something like this death scene be a heavily scripted, heavily authored moment where maybe even the player only thinks they have a choice, but they really don't. As long as we are interacting with it, even the illusion of gameplay, when done correctly, is better than a reality where you're not in control of anything that happens inside of the game. If you want people to feel something, Yoko Taro and friends, let us choke 9S next time. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't played Metal Gear Solid 3, even though you've had, I think, more than 13 years. At the end of Metal Gear Solid 3, the player, as Snake, shoots the boss in the head. We're the ones pulling the trigger. That feels a lot sadder than watching someone else do it. Aside from all that, however, we are done with Ending A, which basically encapsulates the first half of the game. We're now ready to move on to Chapter B, so go get a drink, or take a break, or just hold tight if you're ready. So, here we are at Ending B. Chapter B initially starts off with a very interesting premise. We play a machine trying to revive his brother with a bucket of oil. But after this is done, it's made clear to us that we're actually just playing the story from 9S's perspective. As such, we don't have nearly as much stuff to talk about since we already talked about all of the major events in Chapter A. Basically, that means we get to hop from discussion to discussion without any of that silly story getting in the way until the last few parts of the campaign. The first and most interesting thing to talk about here is that Ending B is a big cheat. It's the same world space, the same plot, the same major events outside of very specific areas that we'll talk about later, the same everything. It's a really clever way to get more mileage out of the same assets. The second most interesting thing about this ending is that instead of having a New Game Plus or just another version of the same thing, even though technically Ending B is just another version of A, but ignore that detail, Nier Automata hides entire new campaigns for you after you beat the previous one. This is a very interesting idea, and one that I like a lot because it plays into Yoko Taro's writing style very well. In other games, playing through the game once might yield a more challenging version of the same game, generally called New Game Plus, or another chance to go and choose a different path that you might have ignored on your first run. But in this game, especially going from Ending B to C, we have entirely new gameplay and story to talk about. B is also where the game does one of those commandments we were talking about earlier. Remember how these games supposedly get sad if you play them twice? Well, here is the point where that happens. Throughout this chapter, we go through the same story as we previously did, at least mostly, but we're bombarded after almost every boss and new area with information about what exactly is going on in the backstory of each. It's where Nier starts to do its world building. Like, for example, did you ever stop to think about that fish robot's relationship with his mother? Yeah, I bet you didn't, but you will. There's also a host of new quests and things to explore that are unique to 9S instead of 2B. Those weird chests and doors with the weird locks we found earlier are only openable by 9S's hacking ability, giving us some very good replay value since we can explore things that were previously locked away from us. It's a little bit counterintuitive, however, since you can explore a lot of this stuff on A and already know where to go on B, thus rendering the actual exploring a little bit, moot. But for these chests, it's the destination that matters, not the journey. Point is, there's still stuff to explore even when you thought you were done. For the most part, ending B is a bit uninteresting because we already know generally what happens, but it does showcase Yoko Taro's style of writing, which is known as backwards scripting, which I didn't actually know was a term until I watched his GDC talk. Basically, Yoko Taro will write out this entire story in one big explosion of creativity, or over the course of a time, or however he writes it, and then slowly strip away parts of it for each ending so that you can discover the details as you progress. The result of this being all of the backstory content that B explains to us about this solemn little Earth we inhabit. You get all of the major events in A, all of the story's background and additional information in B, and then after C you just blow the whole lid off the thing. Now, to say that the story is the exact same is actually a lie for reasons that are pretty obvious to guess. We didn't spend all of A ending in 9S's presence, so there are large chunks of the later game that are fresh and exciting for us to hear about, but it isn't just those. 9S also has his own operator to talk to, and his own pod in addition to all of his own thoughts. Basically, all you need to know is that Operator 210 is a bitch. Also, I'd like to make mention of how our rebooting of 2B was actually recorded for posterity, which is very cool. But I also wonder why all of the game's responses from the player as 2B to dialogue prompts weren't then copied over as well. Because as 9S, it's weird for us to be able to make decisions in the stead of 2B, considering 2B's supposed to be in charge. And also we're not controlling her and can make her say things, which is just kind of strange. It should also be noted that 9S's hacking ability is the primary new gameplay element for this chapter, and oh my god does it suck on PC. Remember that whole tirade about the poor mouse controls? Yeah, have fun dealing with that for the whole fucking game. Honestly, if you have a controller and you haven't played this game yet, just use the controller. It's not worth some of the silliness of the harder hacks. Basically, how it works is that 9S has no strong attack, instead he hacks people. You have to remain still for a few seconds of varying time while the hack completes, and then you get to play the hacking minigame for all of its dysfunctional worth. This is also how exactly 9S learns a lot of the plot of Ending B, by infiltrating memories and the machine network to get information. Now, I've said it multiple times and you're probably sick of me, but again, the story is mostly the exact same, but from another angle. But I still think it's a good idea to have at least a very basic recap outside of all of the important bits. So, the game starts up at the big factory once again, except for with that silly little intro. The factory is mostly the same, except that we're doing a different thing to 2B outside of all of the hacking, and the part where 9S gets wounded. While wounded, we have to do a system diagnostic on 9S to help him get back on his feet, or I guess at this point his foot. And in this moment, the hacking minigame is something more along the lines of what I was talking about when I was ranting about gameplay as a method of storytelling. Instead of just being a bullet hell, the hacking minigame is often used to explore the brains of important characters, most commonly with their memories and such. Pretty much all of the most valuable information from Ending B happens in this interface too, so you better get comfy with it. It's also pretty clever as well, most of the time. Like how you have to turn your audio back on in this very sequence, with plenty of other examples to come later. Once we get back to the 3 Goliath fight, the hidden value of cutscenes is revealed. I know I really went hard on them just a few minutes ago, justifiably, I might add, but there is something to be said about how this game uses cutscenes to save money, considering it has us play the same game twice at least. Still, I think a reused bit of heavily scripted gameplay is as easy to recycle as an animation is. The reset for 2B is mostly the same, except with the added neatness of having our previous playthrough recorded. Everything from us getting the initial mission from the commander to the desert city is the same, except for Operator 210 and 9S's regularly scheduled contacts. Once we get to the desert city, we get the first of the world-building backstory cutscenes that are common throughout this playthrough. Now, I earlier made the claim that there is a distinction between the story and the plot of Automata, and I want to make that here again. These backstories have very little influence or importance to the main plot of the game, but they are grand additions to the story. And the fact that there isn't even a chance to miss them at least means that the people who weren't too interested in side content, and who, might I add, are objectively wrong, still have something to learn. The desert city, Adam's first fight, and everything up until we get to the amusement park are the same until we get this.
This is Tactical Support Unit Pod 042. Control has been assigned to 2B.
This is Tactical Support Unit Pod 153. Control has been assigned to 9S.
Combat data exchange requested.
Exchange accepted.
Proposal. Data should be exchanged regularly for greater efficiency.
Proposal accepted. Data will be exchanged regularly for greater efficiency.
End communication.
They do this a lot, you better get used to it. We have a short stretch of normality before we get to the Simone fight. Oh, and by the way, all of the bosses' names are revealed now. And we get the full course meal to that first little flash we saw earlier. This is another way outside of those cardboard cutout things that tell this game's backstories through literally plastering words on the screen. It's a literal story. I suppose this is really no different to a weapon description at the end of the day, so I really don't have an issue with these. There's a bunch of them that you can find on the main path of the game, and some towards the end are even interactable, so I think it's fine for game storytelling. This is also a really good example of 9S getting his information through hacking. After this, we walk to Pascal's village as normal, but we get a new cutscene.
Brother? Why do we have to wear undergarments? It's such a hassle.
The records claim humans covered their crotches as they went about their business. Revealing one's genitals was seen as problematic. So just be quiet and wear them already.
Okay, but why are we eating this plant matter? Machines don't need to eat things like this.
This is a type of fruit. Our data suggests that mankind gained great intelligence from consuming fruit. So quit griping and eat it already.
Alright, if that's what you want. But once we're done, can we play together for a bit?
Fine.
Oh, great. Then I'll eat lots of fruit.
Oh jeez, I feel bad now. Where the fuck did they get the table? And the whole Pascal Quest Hub thing is the same as last time, and I really do recommend everyone take as many opportunities as they can to do all of the quests and find all of the stuff, because the volume of stuff to find and do in Nier is really, really healthy. I couldn't tell you myself, since my playtimes are inaccurate for any game due to the necessity of having to play it to record and such, but all of the people I've heard talk about this game say that it can be 100%ed in about 75 to 90 hours of play, which I think is really good. That's a lot of game for $60, and it's not so much game that it's overwhelming like every other fucking open world game here made in the West in the last, 5 years, which require hundreds of hours to properly complete. After that, everything from giving Anemone the fuel filter to our first encounter with Adam and Eve is normal, but we see this in their cutscene. Spooky. Everything from the debriefing about Adam and Eve to the fish fight are the same, aside from some humanization of certain bosses and of course Adam and Eve. Now, the fish fight is mostly the same as it was. In fact, B ending doesn't really start its own plot until right about now. And obviously, this was the proper time to have the plot divulge into its own thing, because this is where 9S split from us in A, and now we get to play as 9S and see all of what actually happened. Now, before we get into the real story of this ending, I realize that I haven't gone into exactly how the hacking works. So, hacking in Nier Automata is another bullet hell segment where you enter someone's head, or their brain, or their server, or whatever, and are tasked with shooting down their core, which is represented by a black sphere. You control this little triangular guy here, and all of the rules are the same as they always were. You can shoot orange balls, but not purple ones, but now you don't have a sword. The aiming is again broken beyond compare and made the game horribly frustrating at times, but most of the time the hacks are pretty easy. You have 3 hit points in this mode, 3 hits and you're out. And strangely enough, I don't think your difficulty setting actually has any effect on what kind of a hack you get, or really any aspect of the hacking at all. I think it only affects how much damage is dealt to you or the enemy if you fail or succeed. It's not like the minigame itself is bad. In fact, there's a lot of variety and neat tricks they pull with it, but goddamn does that aiming thing get old. It's also kind of annoying how hacking can interrupt conversations that you're having, forcing you to miss something because you didn't want to wait in enemy fire for people to talk at you for a minute. The story for B really gets going the moment 9S detaches from the fight to go and activate the missiles to kill the fish. We, as 9S, do what we already know happens, and once again the resulting explosion sends us flying to who knows where. I also recommend you start making your own mental notes here, because the plot is about to consume this video like you wouldn't believe. So, after the commander loses signal with 9S, we get another one of these silly little data transfer things between our pods, and then we open up to this. Like I said, they pull tricks with this. We are currently inside of the machine network. A lot of this place is once again explored through text that we find by hitting buttons, like Simone's backstory. 9S has lost his memories temporarily in this place, and even though we get those up and running, we still can't connect to our body, so 9S meanders about the network for a while, reading all of the data he can. We learn once again that the machines are on a network and that it is totally interconnected between all of the machines, and that the machines aren't so mindless as they wanted us to pretend we believe. They've discovered and attempted philosophy, government, society, science, math, and all kinds of other human concepts. Basically, the machines are mimicking us, as in, humans. They never try to make their own cultures, and we learn something about the machines. Whenever they fail, they keep trying the same exact thing that had failed, like a perpetual cycle of trying something and then fucking it up. Just like this YouTube channel. In this game's own words, the machine network never learns, except for combat, in which case it evolves at legendary speed, and shows, quote, overwhelming adaptive behavior, which is learning, but we'll let that slide. Another thing of note worth is that 9S thinks that the network's objective is to fail. After that, we get a transmission from Adam, who says, quote, we machine lifeforms have evolved. We made war, learned, grew, and thus gained new consciousness. Yeah, learned, whatever. 9S and Adam then get into an argument. Adam claims that androids are just puppets of their creators, and then says that maybe we do have free will, because we have desires. He claims that 9S has some kind of a hatred brewing within him, and all of this sends 9S into a bit of a fit. On our next node, where Adam goes further into that whole desire thing, he says this. And then he says this. Okay, so, on my first playthrough of this game, I was expecting Nier to function like other supposedly weird games I had played, which I'm sure you already know because I think I've said it before, and that this message here was not directed at 9S, but at the player. We want to destroy all of our enemies. We want to obtain all of the various little gizmos and items in the game. We want to be loved by all of the people whose side quest we've helped complete. We, or at least some of us, don't trust anything in this game to be happy. And yes, I am sure there are people out there who probably want to fuck 2B. Now, maybe I was onto something here, but according to my two Nier-playing friends and pretty much the entire rest of the game, this was in fact not a meta or fourth wall-breaking statement, but is indeed directed at 9S. This line might seem really silly and insignificant to you, like, oh, this is just some funny thing Yoko Taro wrote to make fun of people, right? But it inspired me to think about the differences between weird Eastern games and weird Western games, and the language barrier between them. I'm not an expert by any means on weird Japanese games, not really an expert on Japanese anything at all, frankly, but I have played a few more weirder American games in my time, and I've noted something interesting about them. Western games which try to be counterculture or different usually seem to do so by playing around with the many supposed set-in-stone practices of making games and telling game stories. There's a lot of fourth wall breaking in this market of creativity, and a lot of poking fun and parody at how games have been created in our short history as a medium. The obvious frontrunner for this kind of game that everyone knows about is Undertale. It's been a while since you heard that name, right? Undertale played around with UI as storytelling, making certain parts of games that were never meant to be a part of the adventure a part of its adventure, like save games and repeat playthroughs, but Undertale isn't alone. I've seen games that make the player character, games that make the player their own character, games that make the fucking computer you play the game on a character, so on and so forth, but it had never occurred to me what the other side of the lake was producing. Now, Japan has its oddballs, just like the West, but from what I've seen, they're in much more important positions than any of the whack jobs we have here. Yoko Taro, obviously, and Hideo Kojima come to mind naturally. Yoko Taro here has written 11,000 years of game lore. Constantly goes on in public about how his stories are crap, and has a knack for weaving certain games that on the surface don't seem to have any connections into a tight-knit series with completely insane lore. And again makes statements like gameplay and story aren't the most important parts of a game. Oh, and he wears that fucking mask everywhere. Kojima, on the other hand, is a little bit more of an eccentric in my opinion. He makes these weird, somewhat avant-garde plots, and has a pretty ludicrous set of requests for his games and his history. Like, according to rumor, Kojima wanted a fight in Metal Gear Solid 3 to last a week. Like 168 hours. And an actual week straight. It's pretty interesting, I find, the differences between our two nations' weirdos. But what really got me thinking is how little exposure these weirdos probably have had with one another. It wasn't until I was corrected about it that I knew that there is apparently a vast market of Japanese indie devs circulating with all of their big dogs, and that I just had never heard about them because their games don't leave Japan, or at least Japanese as a language. And when I heard this, I kinda got a little sad, because I realized that many of the games that I play and love in this style probably haven't left America either. Or, at the very least, English. It made me a little bit melancholy, really, to think about how stranded many games will be because of the language in which they were written. And at the same time, very happy that at least Nier here was able to sail itself into the arms of the world. Well, after this, Adam says more things that make 9S consider that machines and androids are somewhat alike in some sense, and all of this turns out to be too much for 9S to handle, so he goes a bit haywire. Luckily, we wake up just in time to be put back into 2B's arms and sent to the bunker for repair after Adam's death, so we just get to rest easy for now. Now, I hope all of you like plot, because we've, at this point, gotten over the platinum part of Nier Automata, and are currently going into the Yoko Taro part of the game. I don't plan on talking about platinum in the closure of this video, because frankly Yoko Taro is more interesting, so I'll give them a short little thing here. Something feels up with platinum. Their last 3 games, before Nier, weren't spectacular, and Nier and MGR have had some pretty glaring flaws with damage prevention, and as I understand it, people generally still think that they peaked with the Bayonetta games. It's of course not in any way fair to say that Platinum is a bad company, like, at all, in any way, unless there's some kind of secret schemes that's going on there that no one knows about. They just aren't the repeat Grand Slam hitting company that they used to be. I would say that Nier here is their first home run in a while, that while being filled with a lot of fouls and strikes. And I'm still not entirely sure if it would have even been a home run without Yoko Taro. Yoko Taro and Platinum exist in a kind of a strange relationship, where each one plays off of the other almost perfectly to have created a successful game. Automata wouldn't have been nearly as good or successful if the gameplay was as rough around the edges as Replicant's was, and at the same time, it's Yoko Taro that made the gameplay of Automata to be more interesting than just an action game with poor dodging. The entirety of the game's genre twisting came about because Yoko Taro doesn't find games with one singular gameplay loop to be as enjoyable as games that throw curveballs at you. In his Toko Toko interview, he described it by saying, "Looking at AAA titles, of course, I find them beautiful and interesting, but after 20 minutes of gameplay, I wonder whether it is going to be the same for the following 20 hours. Because he finds that following 20 hours to be boring if it's the same as the first 20 minutes. If it wasn't for this man's disinterest in playing the same game for 20 hours, Platinum's Automata would have been a lot less interesting. Platinum Games' motto is, "Platinum never loses its luster," and while that might be true, just like any metal, you can scratch it. But hopefully, Nier Automata is the foretelling of the future. Our return to the bunker grants us an all-new cutscene just for 9S, and everything seems alright until we need to perform a self-hack, and once again reset ourselves. We were doing this cause apparently our time in the network could have caused us to be infected by something called the logic virus. We go to hook up with the bunker's main server when we hear some kind of a weird noise during our data synchronization. This is strange enough to alert 9S, and he stops the sync for both himself and 2B and goes to investigate the server on his own. We go to look at all of the most important data on the bunker's server and find some strange information. We have a storage record of black box data that has been mysteriously wiped of all of its contents, and we find a shipping record of stuff that was going to the humans on the moon, which contains only water and repair materials. No food or medicine or anything like that? And all of this is under heavy security. Strangely, a new port opens up in the server, and after we hack it, we get a document stating that the Council of Humanity was made as a part of Project Yorha. But wait, isn't that not right? Then this happens.
After a long period of battles and adventures, the prophet spoke. Oh, grant me the mercy of the land. Oh, grant me the joy of the heavens. Release me from my yoke of iron. Thus shall our souls be.
What was that?
Wait, was 9S actually able to hear all those weird cardboard cutout things? We wake up and get told about 2B's run through the factory and go to the main terminal to assist. We get to the bunker's main terminal and hack into the factory to take control of a bunch of its systems. We actually hack into one of the machines and now can remotely control them, which is pretty nifty. We run around as a multitude of robots, however, much like the rest of this game, from here on out the actual gameplay isn't really as important as what goes on in the story. We've already pretty much covered everything in some way or another anyway, so it's not too much to weep over. Even the factory after this point, where we help 2B with the elevator, becomes more of a lore hunt than it does anything for the purposes of our video here. The most important thing in this level are the files we find on Project Gestalt. Project Gestalt is a very significant piece of lore, not only for Nier Automata, but also for Nier Gestalt. Project Gestalt, in the shortest terms I can provide, was an effort by humans dating back as far as 2003, which sought to preserve humanity from a newly formed or created virus or bacteria or some kind of an illness known as white chlorination syndrome by separating a person's soul from their body. The bodies would become replicants, and the souls would become gestalts. This is all you really need to know for this video. For anyone whose first thoughts for what the fuck he ignored Project Gestalt, that's like the biggest lore! First off, I know. Second off, I'm sorry, but we don't need it. We're here to review Automata. We leave our hacking interface once the Spider-Bot is defeated, and we get called down by the commander. Turns out we're not the sneakiest hackers, she found us out. 9S begs the question about what exactly the hell we found on the main server, and the commander says this.
You left quite a trail when you accessed the main server.
That's what I wanted to speak with you about, Commander. I found records stating that the Council of Humanity was established as part of Project Yorha, but I'd always heard it was the other way around. So did Yorha actually create the Council of Humanity?
Yes. We installed the Council of Humanity's server on the surface of the moon.
But that means...
mankind no longer exists. In truth, humans never went to the moon at all. Any transmissions received from the moon are just dummy signals we set up in advance. The only thing there is a small bit of data relating to the human genome.
But why would you...
Humans were already extinct when the aliens attacked. All the details are stored on this memory chip. If you want to look at it, I won't stop you.
Wait, you're just giving me this? But why?
No one fights without a reason. And we need a god worth dying for.
This line is actually more important than it seems, but like everything else in this game, it's for later. We wake up again sometime later after Eve hits a table, and 9S ponders how he's going to break the news to 2B. This is when Eve goes on his rampage, forcing the bunker's inhabitants to man their battle stations. We go to get a flight unit so that- wait, there it is again, I see it! So that we can suicide bomb the spider thing Eve is hiding in. We get back into Eve's final boss as our final hurrah for this ending, and this fight is infinitely less garbage because instead of actually fighting Eve, we can just hack him over and over again. We get one last heartstring-pulling cutscene about Eve. We go through the same stupid scene where 9S pretends to die, except those two bitches from later on are there. And then we go to our credits. And after the credits, we get a movie-esque sneak peek for the other half of the game. Okay, so as you can imagine, I am almost entirely out of discussions and points to make. Almost everything else from here on out is based entirely on the plot, and the urge to just skip through ending C and get to the real endings is immense, but we can't go this far in just to skip stuff. These last 3 chapters, which is basically just one chapter, will take much less time, at least comparatively, but once again I'd recommend you go take a piss break or get some laundry done. C ending, if we can even call these endings anymore, is the second half of Nier Automata, where the real story starts to chug along. I hope everyone remembers that thing I said about Yoko Taro making sad games as well, because this is where that statement gets its legitimacy. So, ending C takes place a short time after ending B, where Yorha plans on performing an all-out attack on the machines following the death of Adam and Eve. The commander gives a rousing speech to the invading Yorha forces, and 2B goes to find herself a flight unit. During her descent, 9S monologues about how he didn't tell 2B the truth about humanity, and then we get to play some more of him for a little bit. 9S then gets a debriefing about his mission.
And those are your orders. Do you understand?
The scanners are going to hack into the enemy's anti-air system and shut it down in advance of an all-out assault, right?
That's right. Good job, 9S.
Why are you talking to me like I'm a child?
What? That must be your imagination.
Seriously, fuck this bitch. We go around hacking the various anti-air defenses the machines have set up while being treated like a baby by 210, reaffirming that she is, in fact, the worst girl in the game, and that anyone who says some shit like 9SX210 is false, even if I'm ignoring all her side quest information. After a few more of these guys are hacked, we get a call from another scanner model who pressures us about syncing our data with the bunker. Once we're done hacking all of the anti-air defenses, we get some more patronizing from 210 and orders to go and rendezvous with 2B again. Isn't it just so happy that we get to see these two back to back together again? We go to our meet place, swap back over to 2B, touch down near 9S, and get to enjoy some good old-fashioned 2B-9S interactions, probably leading towards another long stretch of development for 2B to help her break out of her glacier personality. Our orders as of now are to function as a guerrilla tactics unit, helping out a few other squads which are in distress from incoming machine attacks. You can actually get all of these soldiers killed if you don't defeat the machines safely enough, and it feels really bad because you did that, right, 9S dying? Now, these squads here are a bit tough to save because they're horribly underleveled for the enemies they're fighting and there's bullets flying all over the fucking place. But at the very least, we have the solace of knowing that we can't target or hurt them since they're friendlies. So, that's kind of nice. Whether or not we save them is irrelevant. Once they're either all saved or all die, you go off to help a 4th squad. During our fight with these soldiers, the machines activate an EMP attack that forces 2B and the other combat androids to reboot. We guard them as 9S using our totally fair hacking attacks, while the enemy fights back using some new tactics of their own. The game takes the opportunity to once again play with the fact that we are robots by having things like our visual sensors get shut down if we get hit by one of these EMPs. It's neat. We rush to 2B's aid, and this happens.
You okay? Is this a wide area virus? To me! This viral attack. I gotta do something. I have to save 2B. 2B, you okay?
So, a fairly important point of this game's plot, 9S can, in fact, purge people of this virus we're looking at here by hacking them, and we do so just to save 2B. It doesn't actually matter if you try to save any of the other Yorha units. Even if you succeed, these lot fall prey to the Logic Virus's effects. This right here is the Logic Virus. I hope you all like it, cause it's here to stay. Basically, this is a virus created by the machine network that causes anything it touches to go berserk fucking crazy. We hack 2B so that she can kill these infected Yorha units and do just that while trying to contact command. Turns out all of our communications are jammed, so we have to cut through a legion of infected Yorha just to get to the jammer. These Yorha soldiers are actually a step up in difficulty for this game, and one that I thought that the game was going to have us take from here on out, because unlike machines, Yorha soldiers don't telegraph their attacks with a sound and a flash of light, and also don't have nearly as exaggerated animations. Unfortunately, however, these soldiers aren't our new foe, and in fact just exist as an addition to the game's already very wide roster of enemies. We kill our jammer, but it turns out that he wasn't the problem. Something is going on the bunker side of things that's preventing us from connecting. This is obviously a big problem, so 9S suggests that we use a backdoor in the bunker's security to upload our data to the bunker and then nuke ourselves with the black boxes like we did in A. We go with 9S's plan, get into a pretty sick dog pile, and wake up once again in the bunker. 9S and 2B rush to the command center. We tell the commander about the Logic Virus, and this bitch has the audacity to say that we're lying to her, and that we're acting infected? That is, until the Logic Virus gives her a very first-hand look at why we're right. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, how did the Logic Virus get into the bunker? There's no machines here. Yeah, well, remember how Yorha and the machines both operate on a totally interconnected network which allows for the spread of data between each and every unit that has their latest data saved onto it? Yeah, well, that includes the virus. Oh, and the machine network gains sapience and starts to talk to us through the mouths of our now practically dead friends. Oh, and we kill 6-0. We escort the commander out of the bunker to safety through swaths of Yorha zombies. The commander asks us why we aren't being infected right now, and 9S admits to having messed with our data back in B when he hacked the server. We rush to the hangar to get flight units, and right as we get there...
Commander, hurry! I'm staying here. I can't.
Commander!
I too was synced up with the server.
But 9S can hack into your systems and...
There's no time. You two are the last remaining members of Yorha. It's your duty to survive.
But, Commander...
Besides, this is my command. Let me at least fulfill my duty here, to the end.
Told you this shit was sad. And with this, Ending C finally gets started, for real. The bunker is lost, Yorha goes down with it, and everyone 2B and 9S have ever known beyond each other are practically dead or crazy. Even though, technically, 9S should be able to hack, like, any Yorha unit and restore them to function, since he can do that, and since they have personal storage, but whatever. And 2B and 9S rush to Earth to start the rest of their lives. We get assaulted by ex-Yorha units on our descent, and 2B gets a plan.
9S, I need to take over your controls.
You need to what?
I'm getting us out of here.
Okay.
Flight controls transferred to Unit 2B.
Flight controls established for Unit 9S. Setting automatic course. Entering escape route from combat zone.
Wait! What are you... No!
2B goes down fighting sometime later, crash landing in the flooded city. We fight off some machines, and then it's revealed to us that we got infected with the Logic Virus too. Because of this, we go through a horribly frustrating segment where 2B shambles across the world and starts to lose functionality to the virus, all in real time through gameplay, which is good. Now, you might be asking yourself why exactly 2B sent 9S away from herself if she knew there was a chance she could get infected with the virus, and more importantly, why she did it at all, since it makes their chances of finding each other and surviving 100% less likely, especially for him since he's not a combat model, but trust me, that's the least of the logical questions we're going to pose by the end of this video. And as you'll quickly understand, nothing matters anymore. So while we're limping around the wasteland here, let's talk about all that despairing shit that just happened. We're only just now getting the taste of how sad this really gets, but it is a taste of how Nier Automata, and probably everything else Yoko Taro makes, is a tragedy. For those of you who don't care enough about literature to know what that means, like me, a tragedy is a story where a main character who is generally very likable, generally, is brought to ruins for some reason or another. In this game's case, it's basically destiny and things that happen outside of our control. Nier Automata isn't a tragedy just because a bunch of sad shit happens, though. It's a tragedy because a bunch of sad shit happens to our main character, 9S. Some of you might be saying, wait, 9S? 9S isn't the main character, what are you talking about? Yeah, well, about that. So yeah, 2B's got the robo-sniffles, but luckily A2 is there to help and 9S is just behind her. So you might be saying, wait, what sad thing happens to 9S? Oh, this.
2B! Are you...
Alright, so first things first. Meet A2, everyone. We get to play as her now. Now, I have to say, this game has some ass death scenes. I've already drolled on about how 9S's death scene wasn't all that it could have been, but honestly, this one didn't get me either. It's all cause of the haircut. Like, with the talk of 2B giving up memories and A2 obviously mimicking her hair, you know that this isn't the end of 2B. They're gonna merge somehow into what my notes affectionately have named A2B2. Now, I will be honest here, I was not expecting 2B to be the one who dies. I was expecting 9S to, like, legitimately die, not that crap we did earlier, but not 2B. 2B is the one out of these two characters that seemed destined to be the one who we follow through on our adventure, watching her grow and flourish into at least something that isn't a wannabe emotionless hypocrite. Now, there is a lot of information we still need to learn about 2B, and like I said, we're not quite done with her yet, but it still surprised me the first time around. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to finally talk about that whole no emotions thing. It's fucking stupid. Now, if 2B's hypocrisy regarding the whole no emotions thing was something other characters actually called her out on, like if they treated it as an actual character flaw, I would have really liked it. But in the entire main plot, no one ever says, hey, 2B, you cry a lot for someone who's emotionless. Or maybe, hey, how come you get to have emotions? It's nothing major, but it still irks me. So, 2 weeks after this earthquake and random white shit popping out of the ground happens, we get to make a choice. We can, right now, support either A2 or 9S. The smartest of the audience are probably thinking, oh wow, 2 endings, 2 choices, how obvious. But no, you're wrong. Technically. Like, you're not wrong, but you're wrong. You're actually exactly right, but you're wrong. You'll see. It doesn't actually matter what you choose here. I've tested it, so I'll let you decide. Click on either annotation on your screen to see what I have to say about either character's playthrough. Just kidding, idiots. I didn't actually put work into this. I would start off with 9S because I like him more, but A2 is new and exciting, so we're gonna go stare at her, I mean examine her assets. Yeah, that's it. So, as far as gameplay is concerned, A2 is pretty much analogous to 2B. She has some different moves, but it's more or less entirely the same thing. In fact, I'd say it's a little too samey, mostly in relation to animations. I wouldn't have expected Platinum to have worked out an entirely new moveset or animations for A2, considering all the animations are based on weapons, and also the fact that that is a completely outrageous idea, at least in the terms of workload. But I think they could have changed some of the vanity behind A2's various actions to give her her own sense of personality. It's just too easy to see how they copied a lot of 2B onto A2. Even something like the pod petting, which is nothing more than a showcase for the character's personality, is identical between 2B and A2, despite the fact that A2 is a much more hostile character who doesn't even really like the pod until the end of the game. She does have some of her own flavor, namely in her dash, which does this weird floating demon thing, and she can taunt enemies instead of having a holding light attack, but even things like her walk cycle are the same as 2B. I doubt any of this is to make the player comfortable about playing A2 either, because A, Yoko Taro, and B, Yoko Taro. This is probably a budgeting concern. Animations take time and money, and there's only so much of that can go around. Still, what is there is very appreciable because it didn't need to be there. It's just a shame that the team probably didn't have time to put in the full spectrum of detail. However, I am selling A2 a little bit short. She has a lot of custom animations that didn't need to exist, like a different taunt for every weapon type, and an entirely different set of animations from 2B for putting all of her weapons away, so the animation team still went above and beyond the Call of Duty like they did with pretty much everything in this game. A2's story starts off with some kind of a traumatic nightmare sequence before A2 is woken up by 2B's pod, who stays with her until she tells him her objective, or I guess it. The sequence is clever, and I recommend that you just play the fucking game to see why. Not until A2 gets over herself and explains that she's looking for revenge on all living machines does the plot get going again. Our pod explains that there's Goliaths in the desert and that we should go kill them. We do so and unearth a whole new boss, which is like 8 of those previous spider guys stitched together into a flying worm. This is Hegel. Remember that thing I said about how bosses in Automata were hit or miss? Yeah, well, Hegel misses by a really far margin. He sucks. This criticism falls somewhat on deaf ears because I distinguished this as the Yoko Taro section of the video, even though I know that the chance of him seeing this video is equivalent to my chances of having a meteorite full of gold land in my front yard, but I'll make it anyway. Hegel sucks. There's just too much crap that goes on screen while you fight him, and it can be very frustrating if you're on a harder difficulty. Now, of course, the reason why Yoko Taro doesn't care about that is again because of what I said earlier. Story and gameplay aren't the most important thing, because Yoko Taro is more interested in how a game makes you feel and how it leaves you feeling once you're actually done experiencing it rather than just playing it. It's a bit weird. After we defeat Hegel, he forms a prison around A2 and uses a big EMP blast attack that sends us reeling into her memory core, or whatever the fuck technobabble nonsense this is. We learn a little bit about Hegel, but we also learned this.
Normally you'd be called, but we'll be calling you 2B. Continue to observe the situation and dispatch them.
This is a fragment of Unit 2B's memory data. It is an order she received from the Yorha commander when she was still alive.
About 2B. Trust me, that comes up later. We learn some about A2's past and get an ending cutscene.
You and I are the same. We have no one to help us. We can only cry and scream. Shut up!
To round out the first bit of A2's story. Once again, we get to check on either A2 or 9S, so let's switch sides and see how our little guy is doing. Meet Devila and Popola. These two are some pretty important androids who were designed for maintenance and medical services. They help get 9S back on his feet, explain to him what's happened in the last 2 weeks, and from here on out we take control and wheel 9S outside of the camp. Another new cutscene directs our focus onto that giant white tower that sprouted from the canyon, which is named The Tower. And because I have no idea what else you could possibly conceive is our objective, we go and investigate the tower. Trying to get through the front door yields no progress, and even trying to deactivate these 3 sub-locks as per the tower's request does nothing for us either. According to the tower itself, because it can talk, we have to unlock 3 so-called resource recovery units to get access. And 9S affirms to his pod that his current plan is to kill every machine and A2 in a scheme of vengeance. Now, through 9S's story, we're about to learn a lot of critical information about the plot of Nier, and a lot of establishing notes that flesh out what is really going on in the story. And this is the stuff that I'm probably going to end up being the most critical on. But please don't think that I ask any of the questions I'm going to end up asking from a place of malice. You'll see exactly what I mean in due time, and once again, just be patient, and remember that your patience is very much appreciated. I hate to paraphrase a really good plot, as if you didn't already know that, but basically what happens in this part of the game is that 9S goes to 3 of these different resource collectors, and defeats a variety of enemies or obstacles in each, and slowly uncovers more information about the backstory of the Yorha project and the Machine Network. I have no idea why notes that are apparently so confidential that not even the commander knows they exist are inside of these nodes, but you just kind of have to believe that. The first tower is in the Forest Kingdom. Each of these 3 towers is given a cryptic name like Meat Box and God Box. Our first tower is the Meat Box. We annihilate various enemies throughout the structure, but this tower doesn't actually grant us any information of plot significance. Outside of some character development for 9S. Basically, 9S has lost all sympathy he had ever accrued for the machines, and he's going a little bit nutso. 9S kills the node, like actually kills it, it's alive, and we progress to another chance to play A2, which we will take. A2 wakes up in the desert 5 minutes after her fight with Hegel. The sand from the desert has gotten into her fuel filter and has facilitated the need for a replacement. We return to the resistance camp and see a bunch of machines fighting Pascal, and we have the choice here to either kill him or let him live. And while it makes completely zero sense for A2 to let Pascal live, I'm gonna do it anyway. Now, this is a teeth-grinding missed opportunity on my part, but we're just gonna return to the camp. A2 and Anemone know each other, and rejoice in one another's company. There's much more to learn here if you're willing to read the terminal Anemone has, but that's not important for us. She explains that Pascal makes fuel filters, and after some grumbling, we sprint out to Pascal's village. Pascal says he'll make a fuel filter if we get him some rigid tree bark, so we go out and get him some tree bark. While we peruse around the forest, I'd like to commend how well considered the swapping between A2 and 9S is. The effects of both sides can be seen from either side, so that people who tunneled down one or another character aren't totally missing out. We get the tree bark, bring it to Pascal, and he makes us a fuel filter.
Just give me one moment.
He can fly?
A2 insists on returning the favor, so we kill a machine that's been attacking children in the village. Pascal suggests that we get to know each other better, A2 and the villagers, and we get roped into a quest where we go to Anemone to get a philosophy book for Pascal. While we make way for the village, we switch perspectives for a bit and get an insight into Pascal's life of all things. We get to play him talking to some machine children before being interrupted by an ominous collision in the distance.
A2, can you hear me?
Oh, perfect.
Help, A2.
I have the materials
The
you
village
asked
is
me
in
to...
great trouble. The villagers are...
Pascal! Pascal, are you there? What the hell is going on?
Yeah, the village is under attack. Once we get there, we can see that everything is already about half past fucked. The zombie robots are eating each other and shit's on fire. Pascal is safe, and he says that he evacuated the children, so we take it upon ourselves to kill off all the zombies. The screams of the innocent machines being torn apart and eaten actually reminds me, this game has really good voice acting. For a dub of a game that was made in an entirely different language, the transition to English is practically seamless. The voice talent for the Western, and I assume the Eastern release of Automata, is to be applauded for a job well done. In fact, the only relic that would even remind you that this game is Japanese in origin, you know, beyond all the cultural stuff and all that, is the lip syncing, which is obviously off because we can't expect them to reanimate every instance of speech in the game for each language. We clear the village of feral machines, but no one survives. Pascal asks us to meet up with him at the old abandoned factory where the children are, and we make way for there. A calm before the storm, as it were, we only have a fleeting moment of safety before our pod alarms us that a massive incoming machine force is hell-bent on the factory. A2 gets prepared for a blood-soaked romp in the fields of war, and so does Pascal. We fight through the unending horde before Pascal says he has a plan. We kill a tank in his absence.
They're still coming?
Fear not, A2! I can handle this!
Nice. We completely obliterate the machine army and even get into a fight with another Engles Goliath. It's complete shit, but it's so cool that I'll let it slide. We give that shithead the mother of all knuckle downs and check on the children.
No, how can this?
Right. Directed by Yoko Taro, folks. Right, so the kids here, they committed a mass suicide. Sounds a lot darker in words than it actually looks, because they're, robots, but I will congratulate Yoko Taro on getting dead kids past the ESRB. Pascal, wrought with grief and blame, says he cannot continue living with this knowledge in his mind, and asks us either to kill him or delete his memories. I'll take the humane approach and let him forget his life. And with that, we switch back to 9S. As 9S, we're doing more of the same. The second tower we search for is on the coast of the flooded city, and actually has some information this time, and a little distraction right before its entrance.
The remains of a Yorha flight unit. ID of Yorha Unit 2B confirmed within the craft.
This belonged to 2B.
Unsent message found within memory of flight unit.
Play it.
This is Yorha Unit 2B. If anyone is listening to this, there's something I need you to do. If you ever meet up with Yorha Unit 9S, I want him. I'm sorry. Please just give him the following message. 9S. The time I was able to spend with you, it was like memories of pure light. Thank you. 9.
End of message.
Oh, 2B.
This is the Soul Box. It houses no enemies, but does have an array of hacking challenges, one of which awards us this note, which reveals some details about this whole tower thing. Long story short, it's a launcher that sends things into space. Later on, we also get this tidbit. Black boxes, the core of a Yorha unit, are actually made from recycled machine cores. There's also this bit, which I will quote. The back door of the bunker is designed to open when the time comes to transfer all accumulated combat data to the next generation of models. By intentionally allowing machine lifeforms to assault it, the bunker will be abandoned. At this point, all information related to Project Yorha, including this document, will be lost, finalizing the deception that humanity is alive and well on the moon. There are going to be 4 things you must commit to memory by the end of this video, and this is one of them. Now, 9S has a little hissy fit about the whole machine core black box thing, but I think maybe he missed the point. We hack the second node and find ourselves in 9S's memory banks.
That's 2B's data. I know these are just memories. But still... No, don't. Don't do this. Damn it, stop!
So we kill this memory thing, which is clearly just Adam's fight reskinned, and 9S starts to stab the monster, which is totally 2B. Ha! Called it! The pods have another conversation, and we fade to black. We pick back up with 9S and make way for the final resource node, the God Box. 9S, however, has taken quite a psychophysical hit after all of these boxes, so we go back to Devila and Popola for repairs. They fix us up and ask us to not die alone. We head back towards the God Box, and once we get there, we're forced back into A2's campaign. Nothing else really happens here, they just set up A2 getting to the resource node to meet 9S later. We go back into 9S's events and clear through the God Tower. The first event of significance is actually the end of this tower, Unit 210, who is our boss. Now, it doesn't really matter whether or not this fight is good, what matters more so is its significance towards 9S. You're going to see, as we progress, that 9S is going batshit insane, and the loss of 2B and Operator 210 are rather major contributors to this change, because these are about the only two people that he ever really cared about on a personal level. We slowly defeat the addled 210 when A2 decides to stab in.
A2.
2B told me. She told me she wanted you to become a good person.
You... Don't you dare talk to me about 2B!
We kill the big brother, like the one from the fucking start of B, and fade back to 9S once again. Oh no, wait, we fade to the pods talking with each other, right. You're seeing the first of a pretty important development here as well. The pods are gaining somewhat of a free will, or at least an initiative to act on their own agendas rather than just being support units. We return to the proper game as 9S, and having fully collected all of the tower keys, make headway for the final stretch of the game. Fucking finally. We begin our hacking of the tower's doors when masses of machines literally rain down on us as a last resort defense mechanism. Devila and Popola appear from seemingly nowhere, defending 9S as one final act of service while he cracks down the doors. At the very end, it appears we can't even get in until our two friends intervene once more.
What happened?
It's the barrier.
Popola!
No, don't! You can't do anything! The wall's got a self-closing algorithm!
Devil and I, we have to atone for our sins no matter what!
But if you do that, your circuits will...
Devil!
Right.
Devila!
I hope you don't regret this.
At this moment, we get the chance to open up our second novella of the game, technically third unless you skipped the one from earlier, which details the backstories of Devila, Popola, the Gestalt Project, and more or less Nier Automata's most direct connection to Nier Gestalticant. Now, it's come to my attention that a rather important piece of data is missing from this script. Everyone who's already played the game knows this, but for you little outliers, the point of Project Yorha was to deceive the android forces on the ground, like Anemone and her friends, that there were in fact human survivors on the moon, that they had something to fight and to die for amidst a war that seems totally endless. Morale was at some point dropping for android forces, rumors spread that humans were extinct, people began to panic and give up, enter Project Yorha. We resume control of 9S by the time he's finally gotten into the tower. The tower is the part of the game where 9S starts to go full-blown crazy, and I have to say that I think it was done brilliantly. Most people don't seem to like the fact that 9S goes insane in this part of the game, and basically for the rest of the game, but I don't know that everyone hates it because it's done poorly. I think, in fact, it's rather that 9S's transition into a psychotic was done so well that it made everyone dislike being in the presence of the character. I can't vouch for anyone but myself, but I can assure you that I have never in my entire life wanted so much to grab a game character by the collar of his shirt, or whatever the fuck Ninus wears, and shake some fucking sense into them. The tower continually mocks us about a prize that we've supposedly won, and when we find it... it's a room of 2 bees. Yeah, the gigantic AI taunting him doesn't really help 9S's psychological profile here. Though, to be fair, at any other part of the game, this would have pretty much been his fucking birthday present. We fight off the 2 bees, and the last one's body explodes, sending us all the way back into A2's campaign. As A2, we follow in 9S's footsteps until we come across a library inside of the tower. Inside of this library, there is all kinds of lore and data, so 2B's pod grants A2 hacking rights. He grants A2 the ability to hack things, which is how 9S vaccinated people of the logic virus, meaning that he could have done this to save 2B. No, fuck it. He grants A2 hacking rights, and we hack ourselves some literature. We learn about humans, the machine network, and find a book on ourselves before that fucking spider comes back for the umpth time. And then we abruptly skip back over to 9S and find that he's a bit beat around the edges, so we grab ourselves a replacement arm. This implant is infected with the logic virus, so we fix ourselves just to piss me off more with hacking, and we finally come face to face with the tower.
Yorha Unit 9S. Yorha Unit 9S. Welcome to the tower. Welcome to the tower.
You bastards!
Because you made it this far, we have a special announcement just for you.
We'll reveal it once you destroy all the machine life forms here.
After we complete their sick challenge, the sisters reveal their secret to us. The secret to Project Yorha's end plan of self-destruction, which is exactly the same as the note we found in the resource container. This is pretty much the final straw in 9S's mental state, and he goes full-on rampaging lunatic from this point on. It's weird that we were given this information before, but 9S wasn't able to see it or read it or something until now, but it's whatever. 9S fights off more Yorha units, grabs himself a flight unit, and flies directly back into A2's gameplay. A2 fights off our 4th, or maybe 5th, I don't even know, spider, and gets hacked by the tower into a first encounter with the machine network's AI friends. They say some rather cryptic nonsense, and then we get into a losing fight against tens upon tens of copies of these little girls. All seems hopeless until our pod tells us that we can defeat this aspect of the machine network by playing into its ability to adapt to fit its objective, and not fight. This probably won't make sense for some, but that's because I haven't exactly explained what the machine network is fighting for. The war between the androids and the machines hasn't been stagnating all these years because of mass force between the two armies, even though the machines seem to possess an unstoppable ability to restore themselves. In fact, this war shouldn't even have been going on this long. The machine network can advance and evolve itself and solve logistical problems at such a blistering rate that would have wiped out the resistance forces a long time ago if it weren't for the fact that it had orders. It had something to live for, in a sense, a goal in life, and if it ever won or lost the war, it realized it could not have met that goal. Its goal is fight the enemy, but there's no enemy to fight when they're dead. This actually brings me to the point of what I think might be the one and only, I don't know, message or meaning or whatever you want to call the thing that makes us attribute stories to real-life concepts in increasingly meaningless acts of interpretation. Of Nier. Throughout the game, there is a very real and prevalent theme of characters needing something and mentioning things to fight for. Motivations to keep going in a world where giving up would be just so damn easy. The commander even outright told 9S people need something to fight for, remember? Now, I'd like to go further with this statement, but I don't really think I can. It's just a theme of the game. I doubt in every way that this has some kind of a bearing on real-life struggles, or that it's some kind of a, I don't know, a meta-narrative where Yoko Taro is talking about how he keeps making games despite the fact that only one of them was a major commercial success, or anything like that. It's just kinda here. And I think I partially like that, though I wish that maybe they could have gone further with this concept. If anything, however, it works on the main characters better, gives more weight to the whole nothing matters anymore idea. And that's actually what we are doing here. We're turning the network against itself by not being an enemy for it to fight. Never actually thought about that until I played the game a second time. After some time, the network begins to fracture and break until it can only find logic in fighting itself and destroys itself. We finally get to activate our damn elevator, which elevates us into another really cool boss. It's another spider, but it has totally different rules, and we get to switch back and forth between 9S and A2. After each spider bot is worked down through their various stages, they fuse together to form a super spider with 16 legs. 9S and A2 work together to bring down their mutual foe, and after it's killed, they stand at the crucible of their world. A2 attempts to bring some life back to 9S by warning him that this tower is a cannon aimed at the final human server on the moon. But 9S, filled with the feeling of meaninglessness that comes with having your entire life crumble before you, doesn't buy it. A2 and 9S at the top of the tower have a conversation with some rather lacking details, but A2 mentions something along the lines of 2B always hated having to kill you, meaning that she's done it more than once, more than just the strangling. But 9S is too far gone to listen to any kind of sympathy or reason, he just wants A2 dead now. Now we have to make a choice between our endings. Before we do so, I'm going to lay bare the heart of the story of Nier Automata to make way for our conclusive arguments. As we know, humanity has been dead for a long time. Our kind was wiped out by the Gestalt Project, which was a horrible failed attempt at preserving us from a cataclysmic virus. Sometime later, the aliens visited our world and deployed the machines and their network onto Earth, and androids who were left over began to fight back against it under the guise that they were protecting what few human survivors remained. But as time went on and the war saw no end, doubts started to creep up in the minds of the androids and morale plummeted. Project Yorha was then created as a way of bringing hope back to the android armies, pretending that they were taking care of the last of humanity while deploying various kinds of new combat androids to collect combat data and fight off the machine armies as best as they could. Scanner Model 9S, one of the newest of data collection units from Yorha, was created, as was Combat Unit 2B, or more accurately, 2E. 2E, also known as 2B, is an android model specifically created to destroy Yorha units, and was assigned to 9S many times because 9S was such a good scanner that he revealed Yorha's secrets to himself multiple times, and to quell the chance that he would spill the beans to the android resistance, 2E was assigned to kill him over and over and over to keep more or less resetting him to a default state of knowledge. After a certain point, the Yorha project was designed to destroy itself, destroying the falsification that humanity was alive so that new combat models could be made. The war we're fighting has lasted 7,000 years because each side needs each other to continue. Their lives are meaningless without the other. Let's start by choosing A2, also known as Ending D. Ending D is going to take us almost no time to talk about. It's horribly insignificant. A2 defeats 9S in combat, somehow cleanses him of his virus, but dies in the collapse of the tower, and that's all there really is to know. At least for the purposes of my video. E ending is more important, as it grants us the real ending to the game. 9S and A2 fight, which, by the way, has some of the most truly disturbing dialogue and vocal performance in the game, but they fight in such a fashion that each of them is run through by one another's swords. As 9S approaches death, we finally get his novel, which is once again very sad and filled with lore, but this time ends differently. 9S is contacted by the two Red Sisters, and Adam, and Eve, and the whole rest of the Machine Network's massive list of personalities and, well, people. They have changed their minds. They don't want to destroy the human server anymore with this giant cannon. They want to make an ark that will take all the machines and a copy of 9S far away from this desolated world. That ark, of course, not actually being a boat, but rather like a giant hard drive with maybe some kind of production for machine bodies. They say that they saw, finally, that we're more than just warfighters, and they want to take all the machines and 9S and find a new world. We can choose to decline or accept their offer. It doesn't really matter. Basically, you're just creating a chance for some version of 9S to live maybe a happier life. You know, assuming they find a new planet and don't get hit by an asteroid. Or you can choose for 9S to die and finally be free of the pains of his living. Your choice, it doesn't actually matter. However, for all of these choices that I say don't actually matter, that's only something I figured out on my repeat playthrough. A lot of these have a very good illusion of choice. After the death of 9S and A2, the tower falls around them, the Ark flies into the sky with or without some version of 9S, and we fade to the credits.
Report. All Yorha unit black boxes now confirmed offline. Our mission to oversee the progress of Project Yorha is complete. Proceeding to final stage of project. Commencing deletion of all data. Pod 153 to Pod 042. Data noise present in stream. Requesting temporary halt to perform data check.
Pod 042 to Pod 153. Data confirmed. Personal data for units 9S, 2B, and A2 appear to be leaking out.
Pod 153 to Pod 042. Follow project rules and delete all personal data.
Pod 042 to Pod 153. Personal data deletion request denied.
Pod 153 to Pod 042. Failure to parse statement.
Pod 042 to Pod 153. There was data created in my banks as I was referencing the records. I realized something. I have come to the conclusion that I cannot accept this resolution.
The destruction of all Yorha units is an essential component of the project plan. All data must be destroyed.
Pod 042 to Pod 153. Repeat. Personal data deletion request denied. Initiating data salvage. Pod 153. You hoped they would survive as well, didn't you?
We lack the authority for such an action. The rules are protected by low-level systems. Salvaging data poses an unacceptable level of risk. Knowing that, do you still wish for them to survive?
What follows is a very comfortable, at least for me, fourth wall shattering bullet hell segment in which we fight against everyone who made the game, or at least their credits. Up until the point where we more or less have to bring in help from the online community to succeed, calling upon other players' save datas to help us complete the game. The music even reacts to this by singing a chorus to mark the help of your new friends. Then we get our final cutscene.
Everything that lives is designed to end. They are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. However, life is all about the struggle within this cycle. That is what we believe. Pod 153 to Pod 042. How is it going?
I am embarrassed.
Why is that?
I launched a suicide attack, and yet, here I am, still alive. I must look very silly.
Do not feel bad about it. We are alive, after all. And being alive is pretty much a constant stream of embarrassment.
That concept is a bit too abstract for me to understand at this time. I will save it in my list of things to analyze later.
Question, Pod 042. Did the data salvage restore all of their past memories?
Yes.
And are those recovered parts of the same design as previous ones?
Yes.
Then, won't that simply lead us to the same conclusion as before?
I cannot deny the possibility. However, the possibility of a different future also exists. A future is not given to you. It is something you must take for yourself.
And, well, I can't believe I'll say it, but the big three live happily ever after. And the pods also talk to us directly, the player, and give us the option to sacrifice our own save games so that other people might be able to complete the game. This actually makes me a little bit melancholy looking back on it, because one day someone's gonna pick this game up in the far future, and there may not even be any more save games outside of maybe just one to help them. It's also kind of a pretty big fuck you to anybody with unstable internet, just saying. And thus is the ending to Nier Automata. Before we move on to the end, I want to be self-aware and acknowledge the vast underlying missed opportunity of this video. I did not talk about Nier Automata as a fan of Nier. There are innumerable intricacies and details about this game that are made 100, probably more, times as good, once they are viewed by people who know the series' history. If you want an analysis from someone who knows much more about Nier than I do, I recommend going and checking out Mr. Klemps, who is kind of the resident Nier guy on YouTube as far as I've heard, and apparently he plans on doing his own stupidly long Automata analysis. Now, with that out of the way, I want to tell you all a story, because I've outlined this script in a certain fashion that doesn't work without it, no other reason really. When I first beat this game, I didn't totally understand the story of Automata. I thought that all of this game's references to spirals and repetition and destiny, especially the pods' final words about how 2B and A2 and 9S are likely to have the exact same events happen to them again because they're the same personalities, hinted at the events of Nier Automata happening in a cycle. It begins at some point before the game starts, and it begins again once the pods save 2B, A2, and 9S and rebuild them, causing a constant and unending repetition of these grim events to happen over and over. It made sense to me at the time, though now I cannot convince myself of the theory, and it felt appropriate. Forcing these characters to go through all of these horrific tragedies and losses over and over and over and over again felt like just what Yoko Taro would have done. I was told he wrote sad stories, after all. It explained all these events which needed to happen, the idea that 2B killed 9S multiple times, and it referenced all of the game's statements about things being done over and over again. All of these seemingly predestined things, the end of Yorha, the war, would happen because they needed to happen because of the cycle. However, some part of me at the time wasn't totally convinced, so I decided to ask for a second opinion, and was linked to a novella that proved that 2B wasn't killing 9S over and over because there was some kind of a cosmic necessity for his death in A to happen, but because they just had a lot of 9S, and that they needed to die because he kept figuring out the truth. Now, I'll admit, without some fleshing out, my cycle idea is stupid, saying that a lot of things must happen just because they are destined to happen by some illogical cycle. But without this, I found myself wondering a lot about some of the logic behind this story. I'm sorry to say, but to me, there seems to be massive inconsistencies and a general lack of sense-making in major plot points in Nier Automata. First off, why would Yorha keep making 9S units if he always, every single time, posed a security threat to the organization? Why would they even program him with the capability to figure out what Yorha truly is? He's a robot after all. You can literally birth him under whatever circumstances you want. You can program him. If he kept being a problem because he kept figuring out intel he wasn't supposed to, why not instead make him with a pre-understood idea of what's going on in Yorha, and instead focus on him not explaining this to other androids? They were able to do that with 2B, at least as far as not telling 9S what she was doing. The commander knew this information, and she didn't explain it to anyone for, what, like a couple thousand years before 9S delved too deep and figured it out again? Why was 2B made with the ability to have emotions as well? She's designed to kill other Yorha. Why would you give her the capacity to feel things like remorse and pity and companionship for these units? Things that could prevent her from killing her targets and once again poses a major threat into the security of Yorha. Why was Yorha even made with this predestined backdoor suicide timer which causes the entire project to kill itself after a certain time? Like, what exactly was the point of creating this system if you were just gonna kill it off later anyway? Causing the news that humanity is dead to be spilled and making it all pointless in the very end. That just doesn't make logical sense. The reason it's being done, according to the game's own archives, is apparently to create new androids, but where? How are you going to create new androids and get new info if the place where you make androids and store info is destroyed? Why would you even destroy it? Isn't that a waste of very good fighting units and resources in a world where we're at our wits' end? And any and all fighting forces that could swing the tide of battle in your favor are a must-have? It gets even worse if there's some force above Yorha making these decisions, because then we have to ask exactly what in the hell they are thinking with these incredibly stupid strategies. If the machine network and the Yorha network, which are both based on, computers, those things that can solve problems which are barely comprehensible to humans at a speed that we can barely comprehend, both have the mission of self-preservation and finding a meaning in life, why haven't they, in 7,000 years of computing time at a level you, I, and Yoko Taro cannot even imagine, have figured out that the war is going literally nowhere and not reaching either of their goals? If the machine network only knows its final command, fight the enemy, why is it said to be able to evolve and adapt and learn? Hell, why was it created under fight the enemy? Why not kill the enemy? Did these aliens just not understand the thing they created would pursue its exact orders to the point of insanity? Was fucking Pascal the only person in the main plot that had figured out the war was going nowhere in all of 7,000 years? I'm not trying to be nitpicky either, and I hope I don't come off as that. You want to hear nitpicky? Try this. Why are resistance fighters in 11,000 plus AD using Sturmgewehr 44s as an STG Model 1944 rifles? Something that's like 950 years old at the point of the game starting? See, all of that is why I originally liked The Cycle. It gave a fucking dumb explanation for all of this. Why would someone do something? Well, The Cycle. Now, I didn't really consider it until I started writing this script, but having wrote all this, I know that there has to be some kind of a force that is in charge of Yorha. I would have thought that since Yorha had all the best androids, they were the top dogs, or were some kind of a second-hand organization in charge of itself, but there must be someone making all of these stupid decisions. It can't be that these are all happening just because they make for a sad story. Maybe I'm wrong about all this. Maybe I missed the wrong quest or novel. Maybe this will all be explained in a DLC, and I swear to God if it is, I will be unreasonably pissed. Maybe I'm really onto something with that whole cycle thing. I doubt it, because half my reason for creating it in my head is that I literally do not in any way trust E-ending. It's just too fucking happy. I'm not gonna sit here and listen to Yoko Taro's lies. Like, there is no way this game ends with 9S and 2B waking up on a rooftop and, having a really awkward premarital fight about how 2B killed him a bunch of times while A2 spies on them from her fucking treehouse? No, there is just no way that's the real ending, and I don't even know that I know what is. But I'm partially glad that I don't, because I'd rather be wrong and quizzical of myself than think I'm right and not listen to anybody about it. But at the same time, maybe it doesn't matter. Yoko Taro has gone on record in saying on camera that he doesn't always like to give the definitive answers to things in his games to the player. That sometimes he wants us to come to our own conclusion, to get us thinking about his games and to find answers in our own experience rather than on a Wikipedia lore page. So maybe all this stuff I just said about cycles and plots, well, who cares? Weird thing to say, but no one. It doesn't matter if I'm wrong or if I'm right or if this game makes no sense. I said a long time ago that Yoko Taro doesn't care much about story and gameplay, and there's a reason for that. Yoko Taro cares more about how a game makes you feel once you're done playing it. It doesn't matter if the game's plot doesn't come out as a bulletproof piece of art, because the despair created by these awful events makes us feel something. A boss in this game might be crap, but their stories make you feel something. A quest may be lackluster, but its ending tale makes you feel something. A little flower on the street may not really have much to do with this game, but if you know where it's from and what it means, it'll make you feel something. Now, personally, I really like that Yoko Taro is looking towards the emotions games can bring to us. I feel that as an industry and as an art form, we've had a very hard time making people cry. But at the same time, I disagree with his philosophy behind it. I'm not gonna tell Yoko Taro what to do. I'm not gonna tell any game developer what to do, really. But I have to say that I think maybe he should care more about stories and gameplay, because those things very much affect how a game makes us feel, and they aren't considered enough. In fact, I think that Yoko Taro is a little bit symptomatic of a much deeper issue we have in this industry. Yoko Taro has said in his Toko Toko interview that he thinks that the old fans of Nier were odd people. People who looked outside of the way games are traditionally directed and how they impact us, and that they are drawn to him because he too is an oddball who experiments with these very things. I'm glad people are being liberal with our medium. We won't get anywhere without that, but at the same time, I think not enough people are being conservative with it. And I don't mean in the sense that I'm trying to be some kind of a Scrooge who tells people that gameplay and story are the way games have always been made, so that's the way they always will be focused. No, not at all. Rather, I think that we spend too much time looking away from our medium for answers to how we can make people genuinely have emotional responses to our stories, and not enough time looking at it. Very few games use their gameplay as a true storytelling method. It's an untapped ocean of potential that we need to look at more often, because even if it doesn't work, which it does, we'll have no idea what it could do for us until we investigate it. Video games have split their stories and their gameplay into two different camps for far too long. This is an art form in which its artists are looking away from what makes it special in an attempt to make special art. Gaming is special because we finally can make people do things, the same way movies make people see things and the way music makes us hear things. It's time we stopped showing people these stories and made them participate in them in a way that doesn't end up as being a spectator to events in which we're only allowed to interact with on a level of walking characters to places where story can happen at us. But, all of my ranting aside, Nier is a very special game. It's not this genre-defining, generation-creating monument to the gods or anything. No, it's imperfect like all of the best things in the world, but it is special. It's one of gaming's few tragedy stories. It gets you thinking about things, about how we make this medium, about the kinds of stories we've never seen before, about its own story. It plays with how we write games, gives us a new perspective on plot and script writing in a AAA package, and it makes you feel something. It invests you. It gets the emotional centers of your brain beyond just frustration and boredom to actually do some fucking work and make you act like a goddamn human being. Nier is going to be my favorite game of this year. Not the objectively best game of the year, maybe, but I very much doubt with all my clairvoyance that anything will be released in 2017 that is as personally special to me as this. Like I said, Nier makes you feel things, it makes you think about things, it offers an absolutely banging value for dollar package, it has quality in every aspect, and it's interesting. It's not like all these fucking rehashed, soft rebooted ideas and big open worlds with 400 hours of the same 10 minutes of crap gameplay, or any of this other schlock which is just marginally superior or inferior to much better and more passionate games from 10 years ago, that AAA publishers keep convulsing up, covered in ichor and mucus from understaffed development teams who have to polish their games 20 times post-launch just for it to work in time for everyone to have forgotten about it. I like Nier. It's a AAA game that actually has bothered to try something in a world where all the major media we produce is willing to refine but fucking terrified of redefining. It's something I can easily say is going to remain, for probably as long as I'll live, as something that is very near and dear to my heart. Thank you all for watching this fucking behemoth of a video. You really do not comprehend how amazed I am that people find me interesting enough to listen to me drone on about probably a game they've already played for multiple hours of their life. If you liked this video, consider watching some other videos of mine and see if I'm your thing. But not the Dark Souls video, that one sucks. Please do not watch the Dark Souls video. I'm actually not kidding, it's fucking bad. But seriously, once again, I thank you. If you want to support the channel, know that word of mouth is worth 10 times its weight in gold, and that no donation is more valuable than you telling people on forums or social media or message boards or wherever about this channel. I am pretty much in debt to those who go the extra mile and share my content, and I wouldn't be remotely near where I am without my amazing audience, who I will proceed to call retards the moment this video is uploaded. I don't really know what else to say here at the end, so goodbye. Whew, okay. Now that the audio is done, I can go and do my footage.
Wait, what do you mean the game's irrelevant now? I'm not too late, what? Well then what the fuck's a persona?